Maddie Whitaker gripped the iron rail and forced her aching body down the last step. One hand pressed to her heaving chest, because the men on the platform had started laughing before her boot even touched the ground. She'd come to salt beef and cook for a stranger. She would leave owning the largest ranch in the territory. If you believe a woman the world called useless can rise above every cruel man who mocked her, subscribe now, stay to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far Maddie's story travels. The men on the platform laughed before Maddie Whitaker's second boot touched the ground. She heard every note of it. 32 years had taught her the exact pitch a laugh took when it was aimed at a body, and not at any joke that high-easy sound men made when they were sure the woman couldn't answer back. "Lord have mercy," one of them said loud enough to travel. "Somebody best fetch a second wagon." Maddie set her canvas bag down at her feet. She set her sewing basket on top of it. Then she straightened her back one slow inch at a time and looked at them. There were 4. Young enough to be cruel, old enough to know better. The one who'd spoken wore a clean collar and a hat he hadn't earned. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked, grinning at the others. "Circus left 3 towns back." "I'm not lost," Maddie said. "No. Then you're braver than you look, or hungrier." The others laughed again. Maddie didn't. She reached into the pocket sewn inside her sleeve and drew out a folded letter, worn soft at the creases from a week of handling. "I'm looking for Mr. Caleb Rowan," she said. "He's expecting me." That stopped the laugh short. The clean-collared man traded a look with the others. "Rowan?" he repeated. "You hear that boy's Rowan sent away for her?" "Sent away for what?" said a thin one leaning on a post. "A wife." "Can't be. Man's poor, but he ain't blind." They laughed harder at that, and Maddie felt the old heat crawl up her neck. She didn't let it reach her face. She'd spent a lifetime learning not to let it reach her face. The clean-collared man stepped closer, boots scraping on the boards. He must be desperate then. Real desperate. Sending clear across the country for a woman who can barely climb up into a wagon. He tilted his head, playing to his friends. "You even fit on that train, or they have to widen the door for you." Maddie folded the letter and slid it back into her sleeve. "Mr. Rowan wrote that he needed help salting beef and keeping a house," she said, her voice level as a table. "I can do both. I don't recall the letter asking whether the men down at the station approved of my figure." "Oh," said the thin one. "She's got a tongue on her." "She'd need one," said another. "Ain't got much else." "That's enough, boys," the clean-collared man said, but he was smiling when he said it, so it wasn't enough at all. "We're only looking out for Caleb. Man's already halfway to ruin. Last thing he needs is another burden he's got to haul out of a ditch." He looked her up and down slow so she'd feel it. "How much you weigh, honey, asking for the horse?" Something in Maddie went very still. Not broken. Still. The stillness of a woman who had learned that the only thing crueler than answering a man like this was letting him see he'd landed a blow. "More than your word's worth," she said. "But then so does most everything." A wagon came up the road behind them. She heard it before she saw it, the dry complaint of an old axle, the tired plod of a horse that had earned its rest years ago. The 4 men heard it too, and their grins faltered by degrees the way grins do when the man they've been mocking behind his back turns out to be within earshot. Caleb Rowan reined the buckboard to a halt at the edge of the platform. He didn't climb down right away. He sat with the reins loose in his weathered hands and looked at the 4 men. Then he looked at the woman standing alone with her bag at her feet and her chin up and her eyes bright with something she was refusing to let fall. Then he looked back at the men. "Rowan," the clean-collared man said, recovering fast, "we was just keeping your company entertained till you got here." Caleb set the brake. He climbed down slow the way a tall man does and crossed the platform without any hurry at all. He stopped beside Maddie, not in front of her, beside her shoulder to shoulder, and he touched the brim of his dusty hat. "Ma'am," he said, "you'd be Mrs. Whitaker." "Miss," Maddie said. "My husband's been in the ground 4 years." "Miss Whitaker, then." He bent and picked up her canvas bag before she could reach for it. You have a hard ride out. I had a long one. Long's better than hard. He straightened. Name's Caleb Rowan. I'm the fool who sent the letter. That word fool, spoken plain and easy about himself, did more to settle her than any kindness could have. Maddie almost smiled. Almost. The clean-collared man wasn't finished. Caleb, friendly word before you load up. He lowered his voice, though not so low the others couldn't enjoy it. You sure about this one? Town's already talkin'? You send off a letter, spend money you ain't got, and this is what climbs down off the train. Folks are gonna start wonderin' about your judgment. That's all I'm sayin'. As a friend. Caleb turned. Just his head at first. Then his shoulders. Then the whole of him, until he stood square to the man, and the man's smile went uncertain at the edges. What's your name again? Caleb asked, quiet. Del Harmon. You know me, Caleb. I know your daddy. Caleb let that hang a moment. He hauled feed to my father's place through the winter of '66 and never took a cent for it. He'd be ashamed of the mouth I just heard on you. Del's face went red. Now hold on. This woman, Caleb went on, not raising his voice at all, which somehow made it worse, crossed half this country on nothing but a letter and a promise from a stranger. She got off that train alone into a crowd of men laughing at her, and she stood there and took it without running and without crying and without one word of complaint. He looked at each of the four in turn slow. She came to work. That already puts her a good sight ahead of most men standing on this platform. He let the silence do the rest. Now, any of you got a thought about my judgment, you come out to my place and say it to me, man to man. You don't say it to her. Nobody spoke. Didn't reckon so, Caleb said. He picked up the sewing basket too, tucked it under his arm alongside the bag, and turned his back on all four of them, like they'd stopped existing. Wagon's this way, Miss Whitaker. Mind the second step coming up. It's loose, and I keep forgetting to fix it. For a good long while after they left town, neither of them said anything. Caleb drove. Maddie watched the country go by, and Caleb, glancing over now and again, noticed she watched it different than most folks he'd carried out this road. Most people watched the road ahead, or watched him, or watched their own hands. This woman watched everything else. The fence lines, the ditches, the exact color of the grass, the bare patches where cattle had worn the ground down to nothing. You're reading it, he said at last. Reading what? The country. You've been at it since we pulled out of town. Maddie didn't bother denying it. Grass has turned the wrong yellow, she said. That's not summer dry. That's dying dry. Two different things, Mr. Rowan, and a man ought to know which one he's got. Caleb's hands shifted on the reins. That's so. Your creek beds have got no green along the edges. Water's been gone from them a good while longer than this heat's been on. She nodded at a sagging run of posts. And your fences lean south. All of them the same way. Land doesn't do that. Weather doesn't do that. Somebody's been leaning on them. Caleb was quiet a moment. You always talk this much, or you saving it up special for the man who paid your train fare? I talk when there's something worth the breath. She folded her hands over the basket in her lap. You wrote you needed a woman to salt beef and cook and keep a house. You didn't write one word about the ranch dying under you. Caleb's jaw worked. Didn't figure a woman'd take the job if I told her the whole of it. You figured wrong about which part would scare me off. Maddie turned and looked at him full for the first time since the platform. I've buried a husband. 2 babies, one after the other. And my mother, who I nursed to the last. A dying ranch doesn't frighten me, Mr. Rowan. I've watched dying up close, and dying land's the easiest kind. It can't beg and it can't blame you, and sometimes it can still be turned back. She looked forward again. It's men who lie in letters I've learned to keep an eye on. Caleb didn't answer for a stretch. When he finally did, the edge had gone out of his voice. It ain't a lie in that letter, he said. Every word I wrote I meant. I do need beef salted before it spoils on me. I do need a house that don't come down around a man's ears. And I need... He stopped and started again plainer. I need a great many things I can't pay for Miss Whitaker. That part I left out. But I didn't write a single lie. Then why send for me at all, a stranger, from so far off? Because I'd run clean out of anybody nearer who'd come. He said it without a scrap of shame on it, which she respected. Hands quit on me one after another. Neighbors won't hire on with a man they figure's about to lose his land. Bad luck rubs off way they see it. You were the only soul who answered the only notice I could still afford to run. He glanced sideways at her. I didn't expect the town to throw a parade about it. But I'll own I didn't expect that either. What you took back there. They didn't throw a parade, Maddie said. They held a hanging. I just declined to oblige them by dying. Something moved at the corner of Caleb's mouth. Not quite a smile. More the memory of where a smile used to live before the last 2 summers took it. The ranch came up over a low rise, and Maddie went quiet in a different way than before, not reading now, just taking the true measure of the thing. She didn't say it was poor. She didn't say it was small or beaten or halfway to gone. She said after a while, "How many head you got left?" 140. Was near 400 come spring. And how many you figure to walk into fall? Caleb didn't answer that one at all, and his not answering told her everything. An old man came out from the barn as the wagon rolled into the yard. Thin as a fence rail, bow-legged, moving like his knees held a grudge against every step he asked of them. He stopped square in front of the wagon and looked up at Maddie with pale, sharp eyes that plainly missed nothing and forgave very little. "That her," he said. "That's her Jonah, Miss Whitaker. This here's Jonah Pike. He's kept this place longer 'n I've owned it." "Ma'am?" It wasn't warm. It wasn't quite cold. It was a man reserving judgment out loud. "Mr. Pike." Jonah looked at Caleb. "Can I have a word with you? Private?" "Say it here." "Rather not, Caleb." "Say it here, Jonah." Caleb set the brake. "She's gonna hear a whole lot worse in this county than whatever you got teed up. Best she hear it from a man who means her no harm." The old man's jaw tightened. He turned it over a second, then set it flat, the way tired men say hard things. "Caleb, we can't hardly feed the 2 hands we already can't afford, and that—" He gestured at Maddie, not cruel, just worn down to the truth of things. "That's a lot of woman to keep in flower through a summer like this one's shaping up to be." The words landed. Maddie let them. Maddie. Then she set her basket aside and climbed down off the wagon herself before Caleb could come around to hand her down. It took her a moment. Her breath came hard by the time both boots found the dirt, and she didn't pretend otherwise, didn't smooth her skirts, and act like the climb had cost her nothing. She stood there and caught her wind honest in front of both men. And when she'd caught it, she looked the old man dead in the eye. "Mr. Pike," she said, "how much flour you go through in a week?" Jonah blinked. "Half a barrel. Little better." "And how much of it you throw out gone to weevil or damp or gone to sour?" Some." "How much is some?" His mouth opened and shut. "I don't rightly measure it." "Then you're feedin' weevils better than you're feedin' men," Maddie said, "and you're layin' the blame for your empty barrel on the wrong body." She picked her basket back up and settled it on her hip. "I'll eat what I earn on this place, Mr. Pike, and not a bite more. And I'll save you more than I cost by the end of my first week, or you can drive me to the station and put me on the eastbound yourself, and I won't say a word against you for it. That fair?" Jonah stared at her a long moment. Then he looked over at Caleb, and something passed between the 2 men that wasn't in any word surprise mostly, and under the surprise, the first small crack of something that might one day turn into respect. "Fair," Jonah said, and it cost him something to say it. "Good." Maddie hitched the basket higher. "Now which of you's going to show me the kitchen so I can start earning before the light's gone?" Caleb showed her the house. It didn't take long. 1 room below a loft above a stove that had been let go cold too many times to be trusted. Maddie set her bag on the table and started opening cupboards before Caleb had finished telling her where things were kept. "You don't waste time," he said. "Time's the one thing I've got in plenty and can't afford to spend." She pulled down a canister, looked inside, set it aside, pulled down another. "Your salt pork's turned. Your beans have got mold across the top layer that's savable if a body gets to it tonight, wasted if it sits till morning. Your coffee's more chicory than coffee, but I've drunk worse, and thanked the Lord for it." She set the last canister down. "You wrote you wanted a woman to salt the beef. Where's the beef?" Caleb told her. She went out and looked at it, and she came back grim. "You've got near a quarter of it already turning," she said. "Started down at the bottom of the barrel where a man wouldn't think to look till it was too late to matter. 2 more days of this heat, and you'd have lost the whole of it and never known the why." She set her jaw. "That's the first thing gets saved tonight. Before the beans, before the coffee, before I so much as sit down. A body can do without a great many comforts, Mr. Rowan. It can't do without meat come winter. You can save it. I can save what's still got saving in it. I can't raise the dead, not beef, not land, not a marriage, nor a single thing a person's already grieved over and buried." She met his eye and held it. "But whatever's still got life left in it, I take hold of with both hands, and I don't let go. That's the whole of what I'm good for in this world, and I am very good for it." She turned to face him. "Now, where's your book?" "My what?" "Your ledger. Every working ranch has got a book, where a man writes down what comes in and what goes back out." Caleb hesitated. "It's Jonah keeps it. Mostly. Mostly meaning nobody's touched it since the trouble started." He didn't argue the point. Maddie found the ledger under a slumped stack of unpaid bills, its spine cracked, half its pages gone soft and wavy with old damp. She lowered herself into the chair at the table. The chair complained loud under her a sharp, dry creak, and she ignored it the way she had trained a lifetime to ignore chairs. The 2 narrow ones, the 2 weak ones, the ones that announced her to a room. She opened the book and bent to it. She read a long while without a word. Caleb stood by the door, not certain whether he was meant to stay or go, and finding he didn't much want to leave. "You lost cattle in May," she said at last. "A great many of them close together. Bad water. Whole section of the herd took sick at once." "No." Maddie turned a page back, then forward again, then back. "You lost them across 4 days, in 3 separate pastures. Bad water sickens the cattle that drink it. Mr. Rowan, it doesn't reach out a mile to the herd standing dry on the far ridge." She looked up at him. "Somebody moved your sick animals around your land. Or somebody took the trouble to make healthy ones sick on purpose in more than one place." Caleb came off the doorframe. "Say that again." "I'm saying these numbers don't read like any drought I've ever kept a book through." She kept one finger pressed inside the ledger. "They read like a man being robbed slow. Slow enough he'd blame the weather and the Lord and his own bad luck long before he ever thought to blame a neighbor." She closed the book gently over her finger. "So I'll ask you plain, and I'd be obliged if you'd answer plain. Who wants this land, Mr. Rowan, bad enough to steal it a head at a time?" Caleb's face changed. "There's a man, Crowder, Elias Crowder, runs the biggest outfit in the whole territory and means to run the only one." He shook his head slow. "He's offered to buy me out 3 times now. But Crowder's a hard man. Not a he wouldn't stoop to, hooves. More than one horse coming up the road out of the failing light unhurried the way men ride when they believe the land already belongs to them." Jonah's voice carried in from the yard flat and low. "Caleb, you'll want to come out here. Now." 3 riders had pulled up short of the porch. The man in the middle sat a good horse and wore clothes too clean for the road he'd traveled to reach them. 2 men flanked him, the wide, quiet kind hired for their shoulders and not their conversation. "Rowan," the clean man said, easy as a Sunday greeting. "Saw your wagon roll through town this afternoon. Thought I'd ride out and pay my respects to your new acquisition." His eyes found Maddie, where she stood filling the doorway, and he smiled with nothing behind it. "Though I'll confess, I'd been told you sent off for help. I see now you sent off for more mouths to bury before the summer's through." "State your business, Elias," Caleb said. "Same business as it's always been. I'm offering you a way clear of this before the season finishes what it's already started." Crowder named a price. It was an insult, and every soul in that yard knew it for one. "Take it. Walk off with something in your pocket, and your name's still your own. because come September, you'll walk off with nothing at all, and you'll have dragged this poor creature down into the dust right alongside you." He tipped his chin at Maddie. "What did he promise you, ma'am? A home? A wage? A husband, maybe?" He let his gaze travel over her slow and cold. "Look around you. He's gone and hired dead weight to help a dead man dig his own grave the faster." Jonah stepped forward, fists balled. Caleb put an arm out flat across the old man's chest and held him. Maddie did not step forward. She did not step back either. She came out of the doorway, slow down onto the porch boards, into the last thin light of the day, and she did not look at Crowder at all. She looked out past him, out at the dark and dying shape of the pasture, the empty troughs standing like gravestones, the fence lines all leaning south. "Mr. Crowder," she said, "you've said your piece and said it well. Might I say mine?" Crowder spread his gloved hands, vastly amused. "By all means, ma'am, the night's young. You've called this land dead. You've called me dead weight. And you rode out here in the dark to buy a struggling man's grave off of him cheap before the sun could show him what he still had." She turned her gray-blue eyes on him then, and they did not so much as waver. "But dead land talks louder than cruel men, sir. You've only got to know how to listen, and I've been listening hard since I stepped down off that train this morning into a crowd of your friends." She let the words settle into the quiet. "This land isn't dead. It's waiting. And I don't believe for one moment it's been waiting on you." Crowder's smile stayed put on his mouth, but drained clean out of his eyes. For a long moment, nobody in the yard so much as breathed. "Sentiment," he said, finally gathering his reins. "Sentiment's a fine thing, ma'am, but it doesn't dig wells or fill a dry barrel or put weight back on a dying steer. Still, I'll grant you this much. You talk a good deal prettier than you look." He wheeled his horse around slow. 3 days, Rowan. My offer holds 3 days. After that, the number drops. And once it starts dropping, it don't stop." He rode off into the dark with his 2 men behind him, unhurried to the last, a man who believed with his whole heart that he had all the time in the world, and that everyone else was simply borrowing theirs from him. Jonah spat into the dust. Caleb stood staring after the riders long past when they'd gone. Maddie turned and went back inside without another word. She lit the lamp. She rolled her sleeves to the elbow, past the place where the letter still sat sewn into the lining. And she reached for the pot of beans that could yet be saved if a body got to them tonight and didn't wait on the morning. Behind her in the doorway, Caleb Rowan stood and watched the woman the whole of Mercy Flats had laughed at that morning set herself to work in his dying house, steady, unhurried, sure, as though she already knew a thing the rest of them hadn't figured yet. And for the first time in a long, hard while, he found that he almost believed she did. The lamp burned down past midnight, and Caleb Rowan did not go to bed. He sat at the far end of the table, with his hat off and his forearms on his knees, watching the woman work his ruined beef by lamplight, and he could not have said what kept him in the chair. Weariness, maybe. Or the plain fact that he'd forgotten what it looked like to watch somebody fight for his place, instead of quit on it. "You can sleep," Maddie said, not turning around. "I don't need an audience to cut meat." "I know it. But you're staying." "Appears I am." She worked a while in silence, and then, without looking up from the board, she said, "This place mattered to somebody once, before it started dying. A man doesn't sit up all night watching a stranger cut meat for a place he never loved. My father built it." Caleb turned his hat over in his hands. "Broke this ground with his own 2 hands when there wasn't a fence post standing between here and the mountains. Ran 400 head in his best years. Told me once a man's land was the only thing that'd tell the truth about him after he was gone, that you could lie your whole life, but you couldn't lie to grass. Grass showed what you'd put into it." He was quiet a moment. "He died thinking I'd keep it up. I've spent 2 years proving him wrong." "You've spent 2 years being robbed," Maddie said. "That's a different thing, and I'll thank you not to confuse them because I can't fix a man who's decided he's a failure. I can only fix a ranch that's been stolen from." She set down a good cut. "Did your father have a wife? Your mother?" "Died when I was small. It was just him and me, and then it was just me." Caleb looked at her. "You lost yours. Your husband. 2 babies, you said. I did. How do you... He stopped, not sure how to ask it. How do you carry all that and still stand up straight enough to cut another man's beef at midnight? Maddie was quiet for a moment, her knife still. You don't carry it, she said finally. That's the trick nobody tells you. You can't carry it, it's too heavy. It'd break your back in a week. So you set it down. You set it down every single morning and you pick up the day instead, and some mornings the day's a rotted trough and a cheating hand and a town full of laughing men. But it's the day, Mr. Rowan, and the day you can do something about. The dead you can't. She went back to cutting. I set my husband and my babies down every morning of my life. It doesn't mean I love them less. It means I intend to be some use before I join them. Caleb didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. But he stopped turning his hat over, and he sat very still, and something in the set of his shoulders eased like a man who'd been carrying his own dead, standing up for 2 years, and had just for the first time been told he was allowed to put them down. Then Maddie stopped. She set the knife down. She took a pinch from the open salt barrel, rubbed it between her fingers, and touched it to her tongue. She went very still. Mr. Rowan. Ma'am, come taste your salt. Caleb came. He licked a pinch off his own finger the way she'd done, and he frowned. Tastes like salt. Taste it again. Hold it on your tongue. Tell me what's underneath. He did. His frown deepened. Something bitter, kind of chalky. Ash, Maddie said. Wood ash and lime cut into good salt near half and half. Somebody did that careful. Enough salt on top to fool a tired man's tongue, enough ash underneath that it'd never cure a thing. She looked up at him. This beef didn't spoil on you, Mr. Rowan. It was made to spoil. You could have packed that barrel to the brim and salted every steer on the place, and it would all have rotted just the same, because the salt in this house was never going to save it. Caleb stood there holding the ruin of his own salt on his finger. Who? He started and stopped because the answer had already found him, and it had a name he'd been defending on the wagon that very afternoon. Who's touched this barrel? Maddie asked. Since spring. Think careful. Who fills it, who hauls it, who's had reason to be near it? Jonah, me, the hands. His jaw tightened. The hands mostly. They pack the wagon runs to town. Then one of your hands has been paid better by another man than by you. Maddie picked her knife back up. Don't say a word to any of them yet. A man who knows he's caught runs. A man who thinks he's clever stays, and a man who stays can be watched. She went back to cutting. Go to bed now. You'll want your wits in the morning, and I've got beef to finish. Caleb went. He didn't sleep. Neither did she. By the time the first gray touched the window, Maddie had the good beef salted down in the one small cache of clean salt she'd found in a tin at the back of the pantry, enough to save perhaps a third of what was left, no more. The rest went in the bucket. She had the beans picked clean of mold and set to soak. She had the coffee stretched and the stove hot and a pan of cornbread going, and she was standing at that stove, sleeves rolled, when Jonah Pike came in, stamping the night off his boots, and stopped cold in the doorway. He looked at the stove. He looked at the smell coming off it. He looked at her. "You been up all night," he said. "I've been working all night. There's a difference, and your beef knows it." Jonah crossed to the salt barrel like a man who'd already guessed. He tasted it the way she had. His face went hard and old. "Ash," he said. "You knew salt gets cut." "I know it can be. Didn't think—" He set his jaw. This was Reese, or Tom. One of the two. Which one packs the town runs? Both. They trade off. Jonah looked at her, and for the first time there was no doubt in it, only a grim kind of respect. "You found this your first night." "I found it because nobody else was looking, Mr. Pike. That's not cleverness. That's just being the only one in the room with her eyes open." She turned the cornbread. "Now sit down and eat. A hungry man makes a poor watchman, and I need you sharp today." The two hands came in as the sun cleared the ridge. Tom Belknap was maybe 19, all elbows and sunburn, and he took his hat off the second he saw a woman at the stove, which Maddie noted and set aside as a point in his favor. Reese was older, 30 or near it, with a still and careful face, and he did not take his hat off, and he looked at the food on the table like a man doing sums. "Well," Reese said, dropping into a chair, "the town wasn't lying. He did send off for a cook. Sit up straight and I'll feed you," Maddie said. "Slouch and insult me, and I'll feed Tom twice and you not at all. Your choice, and it's the only one I'm offering." Tom laughed before he could stop himself. Reese did not laugh, but he sat up. She fed them. She fed them cornbread and beans and coffee that didn't taste of chicory for once, and she watched them eat, and she said, easy as anything, "You boys ever notice the salt tasting off?" Tom shook his head, chewing. Salt, ma'am." "Reese?" Reese didn't look up from his plate. "Can't say I taste my salt, ma'am. I just eat." Maddie refilled Tom's cup and left Reese's empty a beat too long before she filled it. "Funny thing, half the salt in this house is cut with ash. Been cut a good while by the look. Whole barrel of it ruined careful." She set the pot down. "You'd think a man packing the town runs would notice a thing like that, loading it, hauling it, standing right over it." The room went quiet. Tom stopped chewing. Reese looked up at last, slow, his careful face carefully blank. "You accusing me of something, ma'am?" "I'm making breakfast conversation," Maddie said pleasantly. "You're the one who heard an accusation in it." Caleb from the end of the table said nothing. He didn't have to. He just looked at Reese and let Reese feel the look and let the silence stretch until it had weight. Reese put his fork down. "I don't have to sit here and get talked at by the help." He stood. "I got fence to walk." "You do," Maddie agreed. "Walk it slow. I'll be checking your work." He went. The door banged behind him. Tom looked from the door to Maddie to Caleb wide-eyed. "Ma'am, you really think Reese? I think you're going to keep eating and keep quiet and keep near me today." "Tom Belknap," Maddie said. "And I think you're a good boy who fell in with an outfit that's got a rotten board in it. And I mean to find out how rotten before it takes the whole floor down. Now eat. You'll need it." By full light she was out in the yard, and the day showed her everything the dark had hidden. She went to the near trough first, the one the working horses drank from, and it was fine. She went to the second, out by the corral, and it was low but clean. It was the third, the big one down by the holding pen where the 6th section of the herd had been kept in May, that stopped her. She stood over it a long moment. Then she rolled her sleeve and reached down into the green water and brought up a fistful of the muck at the bottom, and she smelled it, and her mouth went flat. "Jonah," she called. "Bring Mr. Rowan." They came. She held out her dripping fist. "You know what that is?" Caleb leaned in and drew back. "God, that's rot. Something dead. Something dead put there." Maddie flung the muck down. "A trough don't foul like this on its own. Not this fast, not this bad. Somebody dropped carrion in the bottom of the tank your sick herd drank from, in May. Right about when you started losing cattle 3 pastures at a time." She wiped her hand on her apron. "You didn't have a sickness go through your herd, Mr. Rowan. You had a poisoning. Slow, quiet, made to look like God's own bad luck, so you'd sell before you thought too hard about it." Caleb looked at the fouled water like it had spoken his own name. "I drove cattle off this tank for weeks. I thought I was doing 'em a kindness, moving 'em to fresh. You were moving them right along on schedule for whoever fouled it," Maddie said, not unkind but not soft. "That's how it works. They don't fight you. They just arrange it so your own good sense does their damage for them. A drought's an act of heaven. Nobody sues heaven, nobody investigates heaven, and nobody thinks to check the bottom of a trough." She looked at the 2 men. "Drain it, scrub it with lye, and from this day nobody drinks from a tank that hasn't been looked into first. Not a horse, not a steer, not a man." Jonah was already reaching for the drain plug, moving faster than his knees liked. 51 years I've been around cattle," he muttered. "Never once thought to look under the water." "That's because you're an honest man, Mr. Pike," Maddie said. "Honest men are the easiest in the world to rob. They can't imagine the thing, so they never look for it." That was the moment Jonah Pike stopped doubting her. He would not have said it out loud, and she would not have asked him to. but it was the moment, and they both felt it pass. She was halfway back to the house when she stopped and turned her head and stood listening. "What is it?" Caleb said. "That calf, in the pen, the little roan." She was already moving toward it, slow but certain. "He's been quiet since I came out this morning. Too quiet." "He's restin'." "He's not resting, he's saving himself. There's a difference, and cattle keep it better than people do." She got to the rail and looked in, and the calf stood off by itself, head low, ears down, one flank moving too fast. "Get in there and hold him for me, Tom. Gentle. Don't wrestle him, he hasn't the strength to spare for it." Tom climbed in and got his arms around the calf, and Maddie came through the gate, slow, careful of her feet in the churned ground, and she put her hand flat to the calf's side, and then to its nose, and then she peeled back its lip and looked at the gum. "Fever," she said. "Hi. And his gums are pale. He's been off his feed 2 days and nobody caught it because everybody on this place has been looking at the sky and the ledger and not at the one animal trying to tell them something." She looked up. "Jonah, that patch of yarrow by the old well, is it still there?" Jonah blinked. "The weeds? By the well. The yarrow. White flowers, feathery leaf. And whatever wild sage you've got. Bring me both, all you can pull, and bring me a clean pot and hot water." She turned back to the calf and gentled its ears. "Easy, little man, easy. Somebody's finally looking at you." They brought her the yarrow and the sage, and she bruised the leaves and steeped them dark and strong, and she cooled it and drenched the calf slow a little at a time, holding its head in her wide, steady hands and talking to it low the whole while. Not baby talk, but a flat, calm murmur, the kind a body uses on a frightened creature to tell it the danger's past even before it has. And Caleb stood at the rail and watched his hired cook doctor a dying calf with roadside weeds, and he found he couldn't look away from it. "Where'd you learn that?" he said. "Same place I learned everything worth knowing. Being poor and burying people and having nobody come when I called, so I had to learn to be the one who came." She wiped the calf's muzzle. "Yarrow brings a fever down and stops a flux. Sage settles the gut. My mother's mother taught it to my mother, and my mother taught it to me over 3 children's sickbeds, 2 of which I lost anyway, so don't think I hold it magic. It's not magic. It's just knowing and being willing." She sat back on her heels, breathing hard from the crouch. "He'll live. Not because of me. Because he's young and he's got fight in him and somebody caught it in time. That's all doctoring ever is in a person or a beast. Catching it in time and giving it a reason to fight." The calf lifted its head. It was a small thing. But Tom whooped like it was Christmas, and even Jonah's hard old face cracked, and Caleb Rowan stood at the rail of his own pen, and understood with a kind of quiet astonishment that the woman the whole town had laughed off a train the day before had already in less than a day done more to save his ranch than he had managed in 2 years of trying. That evening, while the beef cured and the calf slept, Jonah Pike did a thing he hadn't done for anyone in a decade. He talked. He found her on the porch, easing her feet, and he lowered himself onto the step beside her with a grunt and a crack of the knees, and he looked out at the dark land, and he told her the whole of it. "You want to understand Crowder," he said. "You got to understand he didn't start big. 20 years back he had one section and a mean streak same as any man. What he had that the rest didn't was patience. He'd wait. He'd wait for a bad winter, a sick herd, a man's wife to take ill, so the doctor bills come due, and then he'd ride over friendly with an offer, and he'd take the land at half its worth and call himself a Christian for the mercy of it." Jonah spat off the porch. "The Hendrys, the Vances, old man Selby, the Cobb place you met the widow today, I hear. 4 ranches he swallowed that way, and every one of 'em he waited on like a buzzard waits till the dyin' was far enough along that folks was grateful for the buzzard. And Caleb's the 5th. Caleb's the one he can't stand not havin'. This ranch sits between 2 he already owns. Long as Caleb holds it, Crowder's empire's got a stone in its boot." Jonah was quiet a moment. "And there's the water. Crowder don't know about the deed, I'd bet the last of my teeth on that, or he'd have moved harder and faster years back. But he knows this land drinks better than it ought to, for country this dry. His granddaddy and Caleb's granddaddy both filed claims up this valley the same year, and the story always went that the good water fell on Crowder's side and the dry rock fell on Rowan's. And Crowder's people have been saying it and believing it and lording it for 2 generations. He turned and looked at her in the dark. But you found a deed today, says the Springs Rowans, which means somewhere back down the years, somebody lied or somebody cheated or somebody choked that spring on purpose so the story'd hold. And Crowder's whole idea of himself the waterman, the land his family earned fair, it's built on top of a lie, buried under 6 inches of dust on Caleb's ridge. Maddie sat with that a long moment. That's why the spring matters more than the water in it, she said slowly. It's not just that it'll save the herd. It's that the day it runs again, it says out loud to the whole territory that Crowder's people have been standing on stolen ground and calling it earned for 50 years. Now you got it. Jonah got up, knees cracking. That's why he'll fight it. Not for the cattle, for the story. A man like Crowder, you take his money, he'll make more. You take his story of himself. The old man shook his head. That he'll kill for. So whatever you're planning up that ridge, Miss Whitaker, you best plan it, knowing he'll come at it with everything he's got and he won't come at it fair. I never counted on fair, Maddie said. Fair's for people the world already smiles at. The rest of us make do with true. She looked up at him. Thank you, Jonah, for telling me straight. It's the second kindest thing anybody's done for me in this county, and the first was a widow buying me salt. Jonah grunted, which from Jonah was a whole speech, and went off to bed. She spent the last of the light with the book. Caleb offered to sit with her, and she sent him to his cattle because a man hovering was a man underfoot, and she thought better alone. She went through the ledger page by damp page, and then she went through the slumped stack of unpaid bills the ledger had been buried under. And then, because she was the kind of woman who never left a drawer half-searched, she went through the tin box on the shelf where a careless man keeps the papers he doesn't understand. That was where she found the deed. She almost passed it over. It was folded small and gone brown at the folds, and it looked like every other worthless paper in a failing man's tin box. But she opened it, and she read it, and she read it again, and then she sat back so hard the chair cried out under her. She was still sitting like that when Caleb came in at dusk. You look like you seen a ghost, he said. Worse, I've seen a document. She spread it flat on the table and turned it to him and put her finger on a line of surveyor's script. Read me that, out loud. Caleb bent over it, moving his lips the way a man does who learned his letters late and never got easy with them. The whole of the North Ridge and the spring known as Cold Betty, and all water risin' therefrom, appertainin' to the deeded parcel of... He stopped. He looked up. That's my father's name. That's your father's name, on a deed, filed and stamped by the Territory Land Office. Maddie tapped the paper. There's a spring on your North Ridge, Mr. Rowan, a named spring, Cold Betty, and it belongs to you on paper sealed and legal no matter what any man in this county says otherwise. There's no spring runnin' on my North Ridge. There's nothing up there but dry rock. Been dry my whole life. Been dry, Maddie repeated. Not the same as dead. She folded the deed with great care, the way you'd handle a thing worth a man's whole life. And she tucked it deep inside the lining of her sleeve next to the letter that had brought her here. This paper's the most valuable thing on this ranch, and until 3 minutes ago, it was sitting loose in a tin box any thief could have walked off with. From now on, it stays on me, day and night. You understand? I don't understand any of it, Caleb said honestly. You will, but not tonight. She got up both hands on the table to lever herself, and the chair screamed, and she paid it no mind. Tonight I want to know why a spring your daddy thought worth writing into his deed hasn't put out a drop of water in your whole living memory. Springs don't just quit, Mr. Rowan. Something has to stop them. She reached for the lamp. Tomorrow I climb that ridge and find out what. You can't climb that ridge. The words were out of him before he thought, and the moment they landed, he'd have given a year of his life to call them back. Maddie stopped with her hand on the lamp. She didn't turn. When she spoke, it was very quiet. "Say that again." "I didn't mean—" "You meant it plain enough. Everybody means it plain enough." Now she turned, and there was no anger in her face, which was worse than anger. "Let me tell you what I can't do, since the whole world's so eager to inform me of it. I can't run. I can't ride a green horse. I can't climb a ridge fast, and I'll be a sorry, sweating, red-faced sight doing it slow. I know exactly what this body can't do, Mr. Rowan. I have had it explained to me my entire life by experts, most of whom couldn't cure a rotted trough or read their own deed." She let that sit. "But I can climb it. Slow and ugly and gasping. And when I get to the top, I'll know something none of you fast, handsome, capable men have troubled to learn in 30 years of standing at the bottom looking up. So don't tell me what I can't do. Tell me you'll have the shovel ready at dawn." Caleb looked at her a long moment. Then he took his hat off, which she'd not once seen him do inside the house, and he held it against his chest. "I'll have the shovel ready at dawn, ma'am," he said. "And I'm sorry. That's twice now this town's put words in my mouth, and I don't much like the taste of 'em." "See that it's the last," Maddie said, and put out the lamp. She did not climb the ridge the next dawn, because the next dawn brought Reese's betrayal into the open, and there was no climbing anything until that was settled. It began with Tom. The boy came pounding up to the house before breakfast, hatless and white as milk, and he grabbed the doorframe to stop himself. "Miss Whitaker. Miss Whitaker, the west fence. You gotta come see. There's a gap cut in it big enough to run 20 head through, and it's fresh. Wire's still bright where it was cut." Maddie was already reaching for her shawl. "Show me. Jonah, Mr. Rowan, come on." They went out to the west line, and she saw it, and it was worse than the boy had said. It wasn't broke. Broke wire curls and tangles. This was cut 3 strands clean with a tool, and the cut ends bent back neat and tucked so a rider passing at a distance wouldn't see it. So cattle would find the gap on their own and wander through toward the low country and Crowder's range beyond, and a man could tell himself and the county that Rowan's fences were just falling down from neglect. "That's the 4th this month," Jonah said low, "but it's the first we caught fresh." Maddie crouched slow, one hand on a fence post, and looked at the ground. There were boot prints in the churned dirt by the cut coming and going. She looked at them a long time. Then she straightened and looked at Reese's boots, where Reese stood a little apart with his careful blank face, and she looked back at the prints, and she said nothing at all. But Caleb had followed her eyes. "Reese," Caleb said, "come here and stand by this cut." "What for?" "Because I asked you. Come stand by it." Reese didn't move, and that was the whole of it right there. An innocent man plants his feet by the cut and says, "Look, same boot as half the county wears prove it. A guilty man's legs won't carry him to it." Reese's legs wouldn't carry him. "I got work," Reese said. "You had work," Caleb said. He'd gone very quiet, quieter even than he'd gone with the men at the station, and Maddie understood that this was the dangerous quiet, the one that came before a thing couldn't be taken back. "How much is Crowder paying you, Reese?" "You callin' me a— How much?" Caleb took a step. "You cut my salt. You fouled my tank. You've been opening my fences by night and drawing my wages by day, eatin' at my table, and this morning you cut it too near the house and too near the dawn, and the boy caught you at it." Another step. "How much did he pay you to help him bury me, Reese?" "What's my whole life worth in Crowder's money?" Reese broke. He didn't run. There was nowhere on that flat to run to. He turned on Maddie instead, because a cornered man always turns on the one he thinks he can frighten. "This is her doing. She comes in here one day, and suddenly everybody's a thief. You believe a fat stranger over a man's worked your line 2 years. I believe the cut wire and the boots that won't stand by it," Caleb said. "Jonah, get his things off my property. Tom, saddle up and see him to the county road, and if he turns back toward my land, you come tell me, and I'll deal with him myself." He looked at Reese one last time. "Tell Crowder I know now. Tell him the salt won't spoil the tanks, scrub the fences'll be watched, and the woman he called deadweight found the whole of his scheme in 3 days flat. Tell him that, word for word." Reese's careful face finally cracked all the way into something ugly. You think you won something? You got no water, no money, no time, and a deadline of 2 days left. He don't need me anymore. He's already got you. He spat. Enjoy your fat cook Rowan. She'll be cooking for Crowder's hands by fall. Tom took him off the property. Jonah threw his kit in the dirt behind him. And Maddie stood in the churned dust by the cut fence and felt the thing Reese had said settle cold in her chest, because the ugly truth in it was that he was right about the water and the money and the time. 2 days. They had 2 days on Crowder's clock, and after that the price dropped and kept dropping, and a man with no water and no money couldn't wait out a falling price. Unless there was water. Jonah, she said, how long to the ridge and back on foot? For you. He caught himself. 2 hours up if we go slow, less down. Then we've no time to lose standing here hating a man who's already gone. She turned toward the house. But first, I need salt, real salt, to save the third of the beef that's still worth saving, or we'll lose our meat on top of everything. And there's no salt in this house that isn't ruined. She looked at Caleb. How much credit have you got left in town? Caleb's silence answered her. None, she said. All right, then we do it the hard way. She squared her shoulders. Hitch the wagon. I'm going to town. Maddie. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it stopped them both for half a beat. You don't want to go into that town. Not after yesterday. Let me go. They won't sell you credit, and they won't sell you kindness, and you'll come back empty and ashamed, Maddie said. But they might sell to me because they think I'm a fool, and a fool with cash money is the one customer no shopkeeper turns away. She reached into her sleeve not for the deed and not for the letter, but for a small knotted handkerchief she'd carried out from the east and told no one about. She opened it on her palm. Coins. Not many. Enough. My burial money, she said. Been saving it 11 years so I'd not go into the ground on another soul's charity. Turns out I've got a better use for it. Hitch the wagon, Mr. Rowan. I've beef to save and a town to face, and I'd sooner spend my grave money keeping this place alive than keep it and let the place die. Caleb looked at the coins in her hand, and then at her face, and something moved behind his eyes that he didn't have words for and didn't try to find. Jonah goes with you, was all he said. They took the wagon to town, and the town watched them come. It watched from the boardwalk and the saloon window and the door of the mercantile, and by the time Maddie had climbed down, slow, careful, her breath short, and not one soul offering a hand, a little crowd had gathered the way a crowd gathers for a hanging or a fight hoping for either. Del Harmon was there, of course. Clean collar, unearned hat. Well, if it ain't the circus, he called. Rowan run out of things for you to sit on already. Maddie didn't answer him. She walked past him into the mercantile with Jonah at her shoulder, and she set her knotted handkerchief on the counter in front of the storekeeper, a narrow man named Pryor with a narrow man's caution in his eyes. Salt, she said. 20 pounds. Good salt, and I'll taste it before I pay, so don't bring me the barrel you keep for fools. She untied the handkerchief. Cash money. You'll not find better in this town today. Pryor looked at the coins. Then he looked past her out the window to where Del Harmon and the crowd were watching through the glass. And Maddie saw the moment the man decided that his standing with the town was worth more than a stranger's cash, and her heart sank even as her chin stayed up. We're out of salt, Pryor said. You've a barrel of it behind you. I can see the top of it. That's spoke for. Spoke for by whom? Pryor's eyes flicked to the window again, and Maddie understood. She understood all of it. This wasn't a shortage. This was Crowder's town and Crowder's word, and a stranger with grave money didn't outweigh a rich man's displeasure, and she was going to be sent back empty and ashamed, after all exactly as Caleb had warned her, and there was nothing her coins or her cleverness could do about it. I'll take the salt. The voice came from the doorway, a woman's voice. Maddie turned. A thin, tired woman stood there in a mended dress, a baby on her hip, and 2 more children clutched at her skirts, and she was looking not at Maddie, but at Pryor, and her jaw was set. You'll take the Mrs. Cobb, you owe me $8 already, Pryor started, "And I'll owe you 9, and you'll carry it same as you carry Crowder's," the woman said. "Sell me 20 pounds of salt Pryor. To me. My cash." She crossed the store and put her own thin coins on the counter next to Maddie's, and she looked at Maddie for the first time, and something passed between the two women that had no words in it at all. "My husband hired onto Rowan's place 2 winters back when we'd nothing," Mrs. Cobb said quietly. "Rowan paid him honest and fed him kind, and never once made him feel the charity of it. Then the trouble came, and the work dried up, and we lost the man to the fever besides, and not one soul in this town that laughed at you today came to my door with so much as a loaf." She turned back to Pryor. "The salt. Now. Or I'll stand in your doorway and tell every woman who passes exactly how a Christian storekeeper treats a widow with 3 babies and cash in her hand." Pryor sold the salt. He sold it to Mrs. Cobb, who turned and put it in Maddie's arms, and Maddie, who had faced a laughing crowd and a cheating storekeeper and a whole town's contempt without her eyes so much as filling, stood there in the mercantile with 20 pounds of salt in her arms and had to look hard at the ceiling for a moment before she could trust her voice. "I'll pay you back," she said. "Every cent, and more. You'll pay me back by making that place live," Mrs. Cobb said. "That's all the paying I want. Half this town's forgot what a good man Rowan is. I ain't, and I don't reckon you have either." She hitched the baby higher and permitted herself the smallest, driest ghost of a smile. "You showed him in there. Cash on the counter. Made Pryor choose out loud in front of the window. He'll not sleep easy tonight, and I'm glad of it." They loaded the salt into the wagon under the eyes of the whole town, and Del Harmon, robbed of his hanging, called out one last time, "Enjoy your salt circus. Won't save a dead ranch." Maddie stopped. She turned. And for the first time all day, she looked Del Harmon full in the face, and she smiled at him warm and slow and entirely without fear, and the smile unsettled him more than any curse could have. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "I'm going to remember your face. Not because it wounded me, a barking dog's never wounded anybody. I'm going to remember it because when this ranch is the biggest outfit in the territory, and it's going to be, I want to be able to picture the exact expression you're wearing right now so I can hold it up beside the one you'll be wearing then." She climbed up into the wagon, and it held her, and she took the reins herself. "Good day to you." She drove out of town with her back straight, and Jonah Pike sat beside her, staring at the side of her face like he'd never rightly seen a person before. "Cash on the counter," he said finally wonderingly. "In front of the window." So Pryor had to say no out loud where the whole town could hear him do it. "You knew he'd refuse." "I hoped he'd refuse," Maddie said. "A no said quiet in an empty store means nothing. A no said out loud in front of witnesses to a widow with cash in her hand, that's a stone dropped in a pond. Mr. Pike, it'll ripple. There's women in that town right now saying to their husbands, 'Did you hear what Pryor did?' Some of those husbands work for men who owe Crowder favors, and every one of them just watched the great and mighty Crowder machine deny a decent widow 20 pounds of salt." She flicked the reins. "You don't beat a man like Crowder by out-shouting him, Jonah. You beat him by making his own cruelty do the talking loud in front of a crowd until the crowd starts to hear itself." Jonah was quiet the rest of the way home. When they rolled into the yard, he climbed down, hauled the salt in himself despite his knees, and then he came back out and stood at the wagon and took his hat off to her. "I called you a lot of woman to keep in flour," he said. "First day, to your face." "You did. I'd take it back if taken back was worth anything. Since it ain't," he set the hat back on. "I'll just say I was wrong, and I'll say it as many times as it takes to bury the first sayin'. You're the most cattle a man could ask for in a person, Miss Whitaker, and I don't mean it about your size." It was, she would think later, the finest compliment she had received in her life, and it had been paid to her by an old man with bad knees who couldn't have said a soft word to a sunset. "Thank you, Mr. Pike," she said. "Now help me down. I've beef to save before dark, and a ridge to climb after." She saved the beef. The good salt cured it clean, and the smell of proper curing meat filled the house for the first time in a year, and Caleb stood in the doorway breathing it in, like a man let up from underwater. And then, with perhaps 2 hours of light left in the long summer day, And one day left on Crowder's clock, Maddie Whitaker went to climb the ridge. Caleb went with her. Jonah went with her. Tom went with her. Nobody said the reason out loud, but nobody was going to let her do it alone, and she was too tired and too near the thing to argue about the company. The climb was every bit as bad as she'd promised. It was worse. The slope was loose, and the heat had not broken, and by a third of the way up, her breath was tearing in and out of her, and her dress was dark with sweat, and her legs were a deep, dull agony. She stopped often. She had to. She stood bent with her hands braced on her own knees, and she got her wind, and she straightened, and she went on. Nobody rushed her. Nobody spoke. Once Caleb reached to take her arm, and she said quiet, "No. If I go up this ridge, I go up it. You can catch me if I fall. You can't carry me up, and I won't be carried." And he took his hand back and let her be. They were 2/3 up when the laughing started below. Riders had come along the flat at the base of the ridge. 3 of them, Crowder's men, come to walk the fence line and count the days off Crowder's clock. And when they saw the fat woman crawling up the rock, they reined in to watch, and they laughed, and their laughter carried up clean in the still hot air. "Go on, girl, little more whole territory's rootin' for you. Somebody go get a block and tackle, for she needs it comin' down." Tom went red and started down toward them, and Jonah caught his collar. Caleb's hand had gone to his hip and stopped there, white-knuckled. And Maddie stopped climbing. She stood on the loose rock, 2/3 up a ridge that had beaten her breath out of her body, with 3 men laughing below, and everything she'd fought for balanced on whether there was water in dead ground. And she turned, and she looked down at them, and she did not curse them, and she did not weep. She laughed back. It startled everyone, the men below most of all. A real laugh from the belly ringing off the rock. "That's right," she called down, gasping and grinning. "Get a good long look, boys. Tell your Mr. Crowder what you saw. Tell him the dead weight climbed his dead ridge, and when I come down—" She hauled in a breath. "When I come down, you tell him what I found up here, because I promise you, it's going to be the last laugh any of you get on my account. Now get off this man's land before I catch my wind enough to come down and put you off it myself." They stopped laughing. They didn't rightly know what to do with a woman who laughed back. After a moment uneasy, they wheeled their horses and rode off along the flat, and Maddie watched them go, and then she turned and put her aching body at the last of the ridge and climbed. The last stretch nearly took her. Her legs had stopped answering right. Her heart was slamming so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She got up 10 feet and had to stop bent double, and the black crept in at the edges of her sight, and for one bad moment she thought she was going to go down in front of all of them and prove every man who'd ever laughed at her exactly right. "Maddie." Caleb was beside her, not touching, his voice low and steady. "You're all right. Breathe. You don't have to do it in one go. Nobody's timing you but them, and they've gone." "I have to do it now," she got out. "If I sit down on this rock, I won't get back up, and I need to know before dark, Caleb. I need to know if I spent my grave money for something or for nothing. Then we'll know it together. But you'll breathe first or you'll faint, and a fainting woman learns nothing." He crouched to her level, patient as she'd been with the calf. "Look at me. In, out, there, again." He waited. He didn't rush her. He who had rushed his whole failing ranch toward its grave for 2 years knelt on a rock in the heat and gave a gasping woman all the time in the world. "There. Better? Better. Then let's go find your water, Miss Whitaker, slow and ugly and gasping, just like you promised." And something about hearing her own hard words handed back to her gentle put the strength back in her legs. She straightened. She climbed the last of it, and she reached the top. She stood a moment, blowing like a foundered horse, one hand pressed to her heaving chest. And then, before she'd even fully caught her breath, she went down onto her knees in the dry crust at the top of the north ridge, and she began to dig. "Maddie." Caleb came down beside her. "Rest first. You're gray in the face. Rest, and then—" "No time for rest. Crowder's got 1 day, and I've got a question that won't keep." She dug with her bare hands, and then with the shovel Caleb pressed into them, and the crust came up dry and gray and hopeless, an inch, 2 inches. And Tom looked away, because he couldn't stand to watch her hope die, and Jonah's jaw was set hard against the same, and Caleb knelt there, willing water out of dead rock by the sheer force of wanting it. The shovel bit down through 6 inches of dust, and it came up dark. Maddie stopped. She reached down into the hole she'd dug, and she pressed her whole hand flat against the earth at the bottom of it, and she held it there, and her face changed. "Feel this," she whispered. "Caleb, feel this." He put his hand in beside hers. The earth beneath the dry crust was cool. It was damp. It was under 6 inches of 6 years' worth of drought and dust, unmistakably impossibly wet. "The spring's not dead," Maddie said, and her voice shook. Now the voice that had not shaken at a laughing crowd, or a cheating storekeeper, or a cruel man in the dark. "Cold Betty's not dead, Caleb. She's buried. Somebody choked her years back, silt or a slide or a man with a purpose, I don't know which yet, and it doesn't matter tonight. The water's still coming. It's been coming all along this whole time under your feet, under all their laughing. It just can't reach the top." She looked up at him, mud to her wrists, gray in the face, gasping and smiling like the sun coming up. "It's trapped. Your ranch has been dying of thirst, sitting on top of a living spring, and every soul in this county's spent 30 years standing at the bottom of this ridge telling each other it was dead rock." She closed her muddy fist around a handful of that damp, dark earth and held it up between them. It was never dead. It was just waiting for somebody willing to climb up and dig. Caleb Rowan looked at the wet earth in her hand, and then he looked at the woman holding it, and he took off his hat, and this time he did not put it back on. "You spent your grave money," he said quietly, "on the one thing in this whole county nobody else believed was worth $1. And you were right, and they were all of them wrong." He shook his head slow. "I don't know what I did to have you climb down off that train. But I mean to be worthy of it, Maddie, if it's the last thing this ranch ever sees me do." Below them, the long summer light went gold across a ranch that everybody in the territory had already buried. And on top of the ridge, kneeling in the mud with her burial money spent and her grave dug open into living water, Maddie Whitaker started at last to laugh and cry at the very same time. They came down off the ridge in the last of the light, and Maddie did not celebrate. Caleb was ready to. Tom was near dancing beside her the whole way down, talking a mile a minute about water and fall calves, and a herd fattening on green. But Maddie came down slow and grim, one hand on Caleb's shoulder, for the steep parts, and her mouth set hard. And when they reached the yard, she turned and looked back up at the black shape of the ridge, and said the thing that had been sitting cold in her since her hand first touched wet earth. "They saw me climb, Crowder's men, and I opened my fool mouth and told them to go tell him what I found up there." She shook her head at her own tongue. "That was pride talking, and pride's the one thing I've never been able to afford. By now, Reese has ridden to Crowder and told him we found the salt and the tank and the cut fence. And by tonight, those 3 riders will have told him the deadweight woman climbed his dead ridge and came down grinning like she'd found gold." "So he knows we're on to him," Caleb said. "Good, let him sweat." "No, listen to me." Maddie took his arm and turned him to face her. "He doesn't know what's up there, but now he knows it's something. And a man like Crowder doesn't wait around to learn what a thing is before he ruins it. He ruins it and finds out what it was after." She looked toward the dark pastures where the thin herd stood. "His deadline's tomorrow. I thought we had till tomorrow. We don't. We have tonight, and I don't think we have all of that." Jonah had come up beside them, breathing hard, rubbing his knees. "You want to dig out the spring tonight, in the dark?" "I want to. We can't. It's a week's work, at least maybe more, and I couldn't lift a shovel again tonight if the Lord himself asked me nice." Maddie pressed the heel of her hand to her chest, still catching her wind from the climb down. "We open Cold Betty in daylight when we're rested and can see what we're fighting. Tonight we do one thing only. We keep that herd alive and behind its fences till morning, because a scattered herd is a sold ranch, and Crowder knows it better than any of us. Then we watch the gates," Caleb said. "We watch the gates, all night, in shifts." She looked at the 3 of them, an old man with ruined knees, a boy of 19, and a man run half to ground by 2 years of grief. "It's not enough hands. It was never enough hands. But it's what we've got, so it'll have to be. They split the night in two. Jonah and Tom took the first half, Maddie and Caleb the second, and it was somewhere in the black middle of it, sitting on the porch steps with a rifle across her knees. She'd never in her life fired that Maddie found Caleb sitting down beside her without a word. "You should sleep your half," she said. "Couldn't. Same as you." He looked out at the dark. "Can I ask you something and you tell me to hush if it's none of my business?" "You can ask. I've told better men than you to hush." The corner of his mouth moved. "That letter I sent. The one that brought you. You could have thrown it in the fire. Woman with your sense reads, salt beef, keep house wages to be discussed. From a stranger 3 states off, she knows it for a poor bargain and a poorer man. Why'd you come?" Maddie was quiet a while. Out in the dark, a steer shifted and settled. "Because you wrote it yourself," she said finally. "Your own hand, not a clean clerk's hand, not a fancy one. A working hand, slow some of the letters gone over twice, where you weren't sure. A man too proud or too broke to have somebody write his begging for him." She turned the rifle over in her lap. "I've had a great many offers in my life, Caleb Rowan. Most from men who wanted a strong back cheap and a body they could laugh at behind the barn. But a man who sits down and writes his own hard letter and signs it plain and offers a stranger honest work, that's a man who's out of everything but his manners. And I've found the ones who keep their manners when they've lost everything else are the only ones worth crossing a country for." She glanced at him. "I bet on your handwriting. Turned out to be the best bet I ever made, spring water and all." Caleb didn't answer for a moment. When he did, his voice had gone rough. "My father would have liked you. He'd have hated that he liked you on account of the arguing, but he'd have liked you." "Every good man in my life has hated that he liked me," Maddie said. "It's the arguing. I can't seem to break the habit." And in the dark on the porch, over a herd that might be run off a cliff by morning, the two of them sat and laughed low and quiet together for the first time, and something settled between them that neither one named because there was a herd to watch and a spring to open and no time yet for the naming of things. They watched the gates. Nothing came that night. And that Maddie would think later was the cruelest thing Crowder ever did to them, because they sat up all that hot, endless night jumping at every coyote and every shift of wind, and by the gray of dawn, they were hollow-eyed and shaking with the kind of tiredness that makes a body stupid, and Crowder had not spent a thing. He'd let the waiting spend it for him, and he rode in at full morning for his answer exactly on his own deadline, fresh and clean, and rested with the 2 wide, quiet men behind him. Caleb met him in the yard. Maddie stood on the porch. Jonah and Tom stood off to the side with rifles they were too tired to have to think about. "Well, Rowan," Crowder said, 3 days. I'm a man of my word. What's your answer?" "Same as it's been every time you've asked it. This land's not for sale." Crowder's eyes went to Maddie, and he smiled that empty smile. "Your cook's put some steel in you. That's touching. It won't last past the first dry week." He leaned on his saddle horn. "But I'll be fair since I'm feeling generous. My men tell me your help took herself up the North Ridge yesterday. Made quite a spectacle. Came down looking pleased." He tilted his head. "Now what could there possibly be up on that dead rock to please a woman, so I find myself curious." Maddie said nothing. Caleb said nothing. Nothing. Crowder straightened. "Come now. Friends don't keep secrets. Especially not friends about to be neighbors, because you will sell to me Rowan this week, or next month, or come the first hard freeze. The only question left is the price, and the price only goes one direction." He gathered his reins. "I'll tell you what. I withdraw my offer. As of this morning. Let the summer do my negotiating for me. I'll come back when you've buried the last of your herd, and I'll offer you half what I offered today, and you'll take it and thank me." He wheeled his horse. "Enjoy your ridge, ma'am. Enjoy your secret. Secrets are wonderful things to have when you're losing everything else." "They are," Maddie agreed, and it was the first thing she'd said to him, and it stopped him with his horse half-turned. "I've had a lot of secrets in my life, Mr. Crowder. Poor folks collect them the way rich folks collect land. And I've learned the difference between the kind of secret you keep because you're ashamed of it, and the kind you keep because it's a loaded gun and you're only waiting for the man across from you to step close enough that it's worth the powder." She came to the edge of the porch. "I'll let you guess which kind lives up on that ridge. You've got till you find out." Crowder held her eyes a moment too long, and for the first time, something flickered in his that wasn't contempt. It was the smallest thread of doubt. He covered it fast. "Big words from a hired cook." "The biggest ranch in this territory started as somebody's hired hand once too," Maddie said. "Ask around. Ask your own grandfather if the ground'll let him answer." That landed somewhere Crowder hadn't braced for because his jaw went tight, and he said nothing at all, and he turned his horse hard and put it into a lope out of the yard. He rode out. And Maddie watched him go with her stomach turning over because she had heard the thing underneath the words, the way she always heard the thing underneath. "He's not coming back next month," she said quietly. "He's coming back tonight. He said all that to make us think we had time so we'd sleep. We've been up all night and he knows it, and now he's told us to rest easy." She turned to Caleb. "We don't rest easy. We dig. We start on Cold Betty this hour, all of us, and we get water to the surface before he moves, because water in that lower creek is the only thing on God's earth that'll hold a spooked herd if he tries to run it tonight. You can't dig all day on no sleep, Maddie." "I can't do a great many things, Mr. Rowan. Watch me do them anyway." The heat came up like the inside of a stove. It was the worst day of the summer, and everyone who lived through it said so. After the day, the wind itself turned hot, so that a breath of it dried the sweat off a body faster than the body could make more. By noon, the creek had dropped to a string of muddy puddles. By early afternoon, the first calf went down. Tom found it near the fouled tank they'd scrubbed a young one-legs folded under it, tongue out, and he hollered for Maddie, and she came off the ridge at a pace that frightened Caleb to watch, and she got to the calf and put her hand on it and shook her head. "Water," she said. "Now. Not the trough. Bring it in a bucket and let me give it to him slow or he'll founder." Tom wet a sack and put it over him for the shade of it. "Jonah." She looked up and saw Jonah already coming with a second calf staggering at the end of a lead. "Lord, how many been 3 down that I've found? More coming. This heat's cooking 'em where they stand. Then we've a choice to make, and no good way to make it." Maddie stood, hands on her knees, dripping. "We can spend today nursing calves one at a time as they drop, and we'll save a few and lose more, and we'll not touch the spring. And tonight, Crowder runs the whole herd off a cliff. Or we leave the weak ones to the shade and the bucket, and Tom's care, and the rest of us dig, and we open that water today, and we save the herd entire." She wiped her face. Nursing the calves feels like the kind thing. But the kind thing today gets them all killed tonight. So we dig. Tom, you keep the down ones alive as best you can. The rest of you up the ridge and don't stop when it hurts, because it's going to hurt, and stopping when it hurts is a luxury for people Crowder isn't trying to ruin by dark. They dug. They dug through the worst heat any of them had known on no sleep and short water. And Maddie dug alongside the men and would not be told to rest. Her hands blistered inside the first hour and split inside the second. Her dress tore at the shoulder from the swing of the shovel, and she didn't so much as look at it. Caleb dug like a man trying to dig his father back up out of the ground. Jonah dug on his ruined knees until he couldn't stand, and then he dug sitting down. And foot by foot, they went down into the choked throat of the spring, into wet silt, and then into mud, and the deeper they got, the more the water wanted to come seeping into the bottom of the cut, faster than they could bail it. Twice that afternoon, it looked lost. The first time the walls of the cut slumped in on them half a day's digging, sliding back down in a breath, and Tom sat down in the dirt and put his head in his hands, and even Caleb leaned on his shovel and shut his eyes. And Maddie, who could barely stand, said, "It slumped because we dug it too straight. Water doesn't run in straight lines, and neither should the cut. We angle it. Get up. A slump's not a defeat, it's the ground telling you how it wants to be dug. Now it's told us. Up." And they got up because she'd gotten up, and it shamed a body to lie down when the fattest, tiredest, most laughed at person on the ridge would not. The second time, Jonah's shovel snapped clean at the handle, and the old man looked at the broken thing in his hands like it was the last straw the Lord had allotted him. "That was the good shovel," he said hollowly. "We got one poor one left, and a spade meant for a garden. Then we've got 2 tools and 4 hands and 1 spring that's waited 50 years, Maddie said. It can wait for us to trade off. Nobody stops. We trade the tools, and we rest the arm that's not digging, and we do not stop, because stopping is the only way we lose from here. And I did not spend my grave money and climb that ridge on these 2 legs to lose because a shovel got tired before I did. She held out her split and bleeding hand for the spade. Give it here. It's my turn, and I'll thank you not to tell me it isn't. And then Maddie's shovel struck wood. She stopped. She went down on her knees in the mud and cleared it with her split and bleeding hands, and what she uncovered made her go very still. Caleb, get down here. He knelt. She'd cleared the mud off a length of old squared timber, hand-hewn, laid crossways in the throat of the spring, and packed behind with stone. Not fallen there. Set there. Driven deep and packed tight so long ago the wood had gone black and soft, but unmistakably deliberately by the hand of a man. That's not a slide, Maddie said. That's not silt. Somebody built this. Somebody came up here years ago, decades, and choked Cold Betty on purpose, and packed it careful, so it'd look like the spring had just died on its own. She looked up at him, mud to her elbows. Your family didn't lose this water to bad luck, Caleb. Somebody took it. Somebody damned the living spring your father wrote into his deed, and let your family thirst on top of it for 2 generations, so that a different family could have all the good water in the valley and call it God's gift. Jonah had come to the edge of the cut, and he was staring down at the black timber like he was looking at a grave. Crowder's granddaddy, he said hoarsely. The good water fell on their side. That's the story I've heard my whole life. The good water fell on their side. He spat. It didn't fall. They took it, and they've been lordin' 50 years over water they stole in the dark. And that, Maddie said, hauling herself up out of the mud, is why Crowder can never let this spring run. It's not the water. Jonah told me true, it was never just the water. The day Cold Betty runs again is the day the whole territory learns the Crowder Empire was built on a dam in the dark. He'd sooner burn this ranch to the ground with all of us in it than let that timber see daylight. She looked at the sun dropping now toward the ridgeline, which means he is coming tonight, and we are almost out of day. Then we pull the timber, Caleb said, already reaching for it. Not yet. Maddie caught his arm. Pull it now, half cleared, and the whole throat collapses on the water and buries it worse than before, and we'll have spent our one chance. We clear it right or not at all. She looked at the failing light, and at the exhausted bleeding men, and she made the hardest call of the whole hard day. We rig it, chain around the timber chain to the mule, and we pull it clean, and all at once, when the water's ready to run, not before. Jonah, you and Tom get the chain and the mule and the lantern. Caleb, you and I clear the last of the stone. And everybody pray we're rigged before Crowder rides, because if he comes while we're up here on this ridge, she didn't finish it. She didn't have to. If Crowder came while they were all up on the ridge, the herd below was his for the scattering, and no chain or spring or deed would matter to a herd already run into a ravine. Crowder came while they were up on the ridge. They heard it before they saw it, the low thunder of riders on the flat more than 3. This time, 6 or 8, and then the crack of a gun fired into the air to spook the cattle, and then the herd's answer, a rising ball of panic rolling up the dark valley. The West Gate! Jonah shouted from where he stood with the mule. They've thrown the West Gate. They're running 'em toward the ravine. And in the same breath, the wind changed. It had been building all that hellish day, and now it came a hot wall of it out of the south, and with it the dust, a churning brown dark that swallowed the last of the light and turned the world to grit and roar. A dust storm rising just as Crowder ran the herd, so the panicked cattle couldn't see the ravine they were being driven toward, and the men trying to save them couldn't see the cattle. Caleb was already running for his horse. Jonah with me. We turn them at the mouth of the ravine, or we lose the whole... Caleb, wait! Maddie caught his arm before he mounted, shouting over the wind. Don't ride into the west of them, you'll drive them worse. The winds out of the south come at them from the south and throw the south gate as you pass. Let the wind carry the dust off their eyes instead of into them. A blind steer runs from pain. A steer that can see runs toward water. Give them their eyes back. How do you know that? Because I've watched more than I've ever been let do my whole life long. Go. He went, and Jonah went after him, and Matty heard the far bang of the south gate thrown wide, and 2 men on 2 horses were swallowed into the brown dark. And Matty stood on the ridge with the wind tearing at her torn dress, and understood with cold clarity that 2 exhausted men could not turn 400 head of panicked, blinded, thirst-crazed cattle away from a cliff in a storm by strength alone. It could not be done. They would ride into that dark, and they would not ride out of it, unless the cattle were given something to turn toward. "Tom," she grabbed the boy's arm. "Listen to me and don't argue, there's no time. You know the iron triangle by the cookhouse door, the one I ring for meals. Ma'am, the herd knows that sound, Tom. 3 days I've rung it, and 3 days they've watched the feed come after. A steer's got no sense, but it's got a memory in its belly. You get down there, and you ring that triangle, like the end of the world, and you don't stop ringing it. You hear me? Not if the storm blows you flat, you ring feed into that dark, so the herd's got a voice to run toward that isn't a cliff." She was already shoving him toward the slope. "Go." Tom went half falling down the ridge into the brown. "Jonah!" she called. But Jonah was gone with Caleb. It was her and the mule, and the chain, and the choked spring, and a herd running blind toward a ravine, and 1 shovel. She looked at the rigged timber. It wasn't clear yet. Another foot of stone to pull before it could come free without collapsing the throat. In daylight rested, it was an hour's careful work. She had no hour. She had minutes in the dark, in a storm, alone, on hands she'd already dug to the bone. She got down into the mud, and she dug. She dug like she had never dug in her life. The wind drove grit into the cut faster than she could clear it, and she cleared it anyway. The lantern blew out, and she dug blind by feel her fingers finding the edges of the stones and worrying them loose one at a time, and each one she pulled free. The water rose higher and colder around her knees, wanting out, pressing at the last of the plug, like a living thing that had waited 50 years in the dark and could smell the open sky. And somewhere in that digging alone in the storm, with her hands going to ruin every voice that had ever laughed at her, came back to keep her company. The men on the platform. Circus left 3 towns back. The clean collars. "How much you weigh, honey, askin' for the horse?" Reese. "She'll be cookin' for Crowder's hands by fall." The riders at the bottom of the ridge. "Somebody get a block and tackle." A whole lifetime of laughter, and every scrap of it had said the same thing in the same voice, that a body like hers was a thing that failed, a thing that sat down, a thing that got carried or got left. She'd heard it so long she'd near come to keep the tune herself. "No," she said out loud to the storm, to the dark, to all of them. "Not tonight. Not on this ridge." She pulled another stone. "You spent my whole life telling me what this body couldn't do." Another. "So let me tell you what it's going to do right now. It's going to open a river with its bare hands in the dark and turn 400 head off a cliff, and it's going to save a good man's ranch, and every one of you is going to have to live the rest of your lives knowing the dead weight did it while the able-bodied slept." Her hands stopped hurting, which frightened her worse than the hurting had, because she knew what it meant. She kept digging. Down in the valley, she could hear it, the bawl of the herd, and under it faint and desperate and steady. The ring of the iron triangle, Tom ringing feed into the storm, like she'd told him on, and the herd's cry seeming to waver, to slow, to turn its ear toward that small stubborn sound, but not enough. She could hear it not being enough. The herd was too far gone, too crazed with thirst and terror, and a memory of feed could not outrun a stampede. What they needed was not the sound of feed. What they needed was water, running water downhill in the lower creek, where a thirsty animal's own nose would drag it away from the ravine, no matter how the men behind it drove. She had to open the spring, now, half cleared or not. Caleb was right, she said aloud to nobody, to the dark, to the 50-year-old timber under her ruined hands. "I can't do this." She laughed, a cracked and gasping sound. "I truly can't. Well, wouldn't be the first impossible thing I've done since supper." She wrapped the chain around the timber by feel. She waded to the mule, and she took its head, and she talked to it, the way she'd talked to the sick calf, low and certain, and she backed it into the traces, and she set her own shoulder against its haunch, and she said, "Pull, you sweet ugly beast. Pull for both of us." And she slapped it on, and the mule leaned into the chain, and the chain came taut, and the old black timber groaned in the throat of the spring and held. And she threw her own weight on the chain beside the mule, her torn hands screaming back to life around the iron, her feet slipping in the mud, and she pulled this body. The whole world had spent 32 years telling her was good for nothing. This body they'd laughed at off a train and up a ridge. She put the whole of it against the chain, and she pulled. That was how Caleb found her. He came up out of the storm on a foundered horse driven back off the herd, coughing dust half blind, and he found her hauling on a chain in the dark, beside a mule mud to her chest, her hands running dark with something that wasn't only mud. "Maddie. God, stop your hands, you'll kill yourself." "Get on the chain," she gasped. "Don't tell me to stop. Get on the chain." "You can't." "I have been told my whole life what this body could not do." She turned her face to him in the dark, and there were tears cutting clean tracks through the filth on it, and her voice came out low and shaking and absolutely certain. "Today it is going to save your ranch, Caleb Rowan. Now get on the chain or get out of my way." He got on the chain. They pulled together. The mule and the man and the woman, the three of them straining in the dark with the storm screaming around them, and the herd bawling toward the cliff below, and the old timber groaned and shifted and groaned, and gave. It came free all at once with a sound like the earth exhaling 50 years of held breath, and behind it the stone plug crumbled, and Cold Betty came awake. At first it was only a thin brown trickle, no more than a weeping in the dark, and Maddie's heart near stopped, because if that was all of it, then it was all for nothing. But the trickle widened, it cleared. The brown ran off it and left it silver even in the dark. And then it was a flow, and then it was more than a flow. A cold, clean rush of water rising out of ground that had been called dead for 50 years, pouring down the old channel Maddie had traced days before, running downhill, gathering racing for the lower creek bed, and the thirsty ravine-bound herd below. And down in the storm the cattle smelled it. There is nothing on earth that will turn a thirsting animal like the smell of live water, and this water was live, and it came to them on the very wind that had blinded them, and the herd's bawling changed. It changed from panic to want. The leaders, the old cows who'd smelled 100 dry summers, threw up their heads and swung toward the water, and the herd swung with them, 400 head, turning as one great blind body away from the ravine and toward the creek, away from Crowder's cliff and toward Cold Betty's water, and the iron triangle rang on through the dark, and Tom's voice cracked and sobbing rang under it, and the stampede that was to have ended, the Rowan Ranch broke against the smell of stolen water, come home and turned, and was a herd again. Maddie sat down in the mud beside the running spring. She sat down because her legs would no longer hold her, and she put her ruined hands in the cold water, because it was the only thing in the world she wanted. And Caleb dropped down beside her, and took her wrists, and looked at the wreck of her palms in the light of the risen moon, now cutting through the thinning storm, and he made a sound low in his throat. "Your hands. They'll mend." She was watching the water. Everything mends, Caleb, if you catch it in time, even a 50-year-old spring. She leaned her head back and let the cold water run over her wrists, and she laughed weak and cracked and joyful. "Listen, you hear that downhill? That's not the wind anymore. That's the herd drinking. That's 400 head your ranch didn't lose tonight. You could have died up here," Caleb said, and his voice broke on it. "Alone in the dark on that chain. If I'd come up a minute later. But you didn't." She turned her filthy, streaked, smiling face to him. "You came up right on time. That's the only kind of coming that counts, Caleb, the on-time kind. Everybody's sorry after. Precious few show up during." She pressed her wrapped hand briefly over his where it held her wrist. "You showed up during. I'll remember that longer than I remember any of the ones who laughed." Jonah came limping up the channel, then leading his horse, holding his arm against his side in a way that made Maddie sit up sharp. "Jonah, you're hurt. Went off the horse when the herd turned. Landed wrong." He was gray with pain and gritting through it. "Arms broke, I reckon, or near it. Don't matter." He stopped at the edge of the spring and looked down at the water pouring silver in the moonlight, and this hard old man who hadn't wept at 4 funerals Maddie knew of took off his hat and stood there with the water shining in his old eyes. 51 years, he said thickly. 51 years I've knelt at dry troughs on this land and cursed the sky for it, and it was never the sky. He looked at Maddie. You didn't just save the herd, girl. You dug up the truth this whole valley's been sleeping on top of for 2 generations, and I aim to be standing right there when you show it to Crowder in the daylight. You'll be standing there with a splinted arm and not 1 step closer to the water than that rock, Maddie said, or I'll splint your fool neck instead. Sit down. Caleb, help him. The herd's safe, the water's up, and there's not a thing more any of us can do in the dark that we can't do better at dawn. She hauled herself at last to her feet, swaying. Because Crowder will come at dawn. He always comes to survey what he thinks he's won. Only this morning he's going to ride up, expecting a scattered herd and a broken man ready to sell. And he's going to find live water, a whole herd drinking, and a piece of black timber that ends his family's 50-year lie. She looked down the ridge toward the sound of the drinking herd, and her battered face set hard and bright. Let him come. Let him bring the whole town if he likes. I've been waiting my entire life to be underestimated by exactly the right man on exactly the right morning. Crowder came at dawn, and he brought the town. He'd meant it for his triumph. That was the thing Maddie had counted on, and the thing that broke him. He rode up the valley in the first light with 12 men behind him, his own hands, and behind them, invited to witness the fall of the Rowan Ranch, a clot of townsfolk he'd gathered on the way, come to see the fat cook's foolishness and the stubborn rancher's ruin. Del Harmon was among them, grinning. Pryor, the storekeeper, the county clerk. A knot of the same men who'd laughed Maddie off the train come to laugh again at the end of the show, and they rode up out of the low country, expecting a ravine full of dead cattle, and found instead 400 head standing fat and calm and dripping along a running creek, and above them on the ridge water, pouring silver down a channel that everyone in the county had sworn on their fathers' graves was dead dry rock. Crowder reined in so hard his horse threw its head. Nobody said anything for a long moment. The whole gathered crowd just stared at the impossible water. Then, Crowder's face went from white to red, and he found his voice, and it came out ugly. He's stealing it. You're all witness Rowan's tapped a water source that don't belong to him, diverted it onto his land. That's theft. That's a hanging matter in this territory, and I've brought the county clerk to see it done proper. You have brought the county clerk, Maddie said. She came down off the ridge slow, in her torn dress, with her wrapped and ruined hands held before her, and the crowd went quiet, watching the woman they'd laughed at come walking down out of the dawn, like something out of scripture. She stopped in front of Crowder's horse, and she did not raise her voice, because she had learned long ago that a quiet voice in a silent crowd carries further than any shout. You've brought the county clerk, Mr. Crowder, and I thank you for it, because I've a document that wants his eyes. She reached into the lining of her sleeve past the letter and drew out the deed and unfolded it with her bandaged fingers and held it up. This is the deed to this parcel, filed and stamped by the Territory Land Office in the name of Caleb Rowan's father. And it names the spring, by its name, Cold Betty, and all the water rising from it deeded, sealed, and legal to this ranch. She turned and held it out. Read it aloud, sir, if you'd be so kind. Loud enough for the whole town, Mr. Crowder was thoughtful enough to bring. The county clerk took it. He read it in the growing light, his eyebrows climbing his forehead, and then he read it aloud, and the crowd heard the name of the spring in the dead rancher's deed, and a murmur went through them, like wind through wheat. That deed's a forgery, Crowder said, but his voice had cracked down the middle. The Rowans never held that water, everyone in this valley knows. The water fell to my. The water didn't fall to anyone, Mr. Crowder. Maddie turned and pointed up the ridge to where Caleb and Jonah stood beside the running spring, and the thing they'd hauled out of it in the night. Bring it down, Caleb. Caleb came down the ridge carrying the length of black hand-hewn timber, and he laid it in the dirt at the feet of Crowder's horse in front of the county clerk and the storekeeper and Del Harmon and the whole gathered town. That was driven into the throat of that spring by a man's hand, Maddie said, and packed behind with cut stone and left to choke off the living water so this ranch would thirst and a neighbor's ranch would prosper. It's been down there 50 years near as we can tell. Since about the time two families filed their claims in this valley, the same season, and the story got started that all the good water fell on one side. She looked at Crowder, and she let the silence do its work, and then she said gently, which was the cruelest way she could have said it, "Somebody choked this spring in the dark 2 generations ago, sir, and your family has been living on the water they took ever since, and calling it a gift from God. That's the story your empire's built on, a timber in the dark, and it's lying in the dirt at your feet now in front of the whole county, and you can call my deed a forgery all morning, but you cannot make that timber be anything but what it is." The crowd was not laughing now. They were looking at the black timber in the dirt and at the running water on the ridge and at the deed in the clerk's hand, and then slowly, one face at a time, they were looking at Elias Crowder. And the look was not the look men give a rich man they fear. It was the look men give a thief they've just watched get caught. Del Harmon had stopped grinning, and then a voice came out of the crowd, a woman's voice, thin and tired and absolutely steady, and Maddie knew it before she turned. "I'll witness it." Mrs. Cobb pushed to the front, the baby still on her hip, her 2 children clutching her skirts, and she looked not at Maddie, but at the county clerk, and then at the whole gathered town. "I'll witness what I'm looking at. That's water on Rowan land that this whole county called dead. That's a deed in your hand, clerk, with the dead man's name on it, and that's a piece of timber somebody drove into the throat of that spring by hand." She turned and looked at Crowder, and her voice didn't rise, but it carried to every soul on that hillside. "My husband hired onto this ranch when your outfit wouldn't have us Elias Crowder. He died poor, and I've spent 2 years wonderin' how a valley this dry made one family rich and left the rest of us beggin' at Pryor's counter. Now I know. Now the whole town knows." She hitched the baby up. "You didn't earn that water. You stole it in the dark and let good families thirst so you could call yourself blessed. I'll witness that till the day I die, and I'll tell my children, and they'll tell theirs." A second voice, then a third. An old man near the back said low, "The Selby place had a spring went dry the same way, overnight. Nobody could say why." And another, "So did the Vances." And the murmur that went through the crowd now was not a murmur of wonder anymore. It was a murmur of men doing sums they should have done years before and not liking the answer. Pryor, the storekeeper, would not meet anyone's eyes. The county clerk folded the deed with great care and held it against his chest like the evidence it was, and he looked at Crowder and he said in the dry official voice of a man who has just realized which way the wind has finally turned, "Mr. Crowder, this deed appears in order to me, and that timber will want looking into, officially." He cleared his throat. "I think you'd best not touch this water or this land pending inquiry." That was the moment Elias Crowder lost the territory. Not the water, not the herd. The territory. The 50 years of men tipping their hats to him, of shopkeepers holding his credit sacred, of a whole valley, believing the story he'd been born on top of. He watched it go out of the faces around him one at a time, and there was not one thing his money could do to call it back, because you cannot buy back a story once the crowd has seen the timber that gives it the lie. Crowder sat his horse in the middle of the town he'd brought to watch a woman fail, and he understood the way a man understands the ground going out from under him, that he had ridden his witnesses out to the one place on earth he should never have let them see. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out that was worth the breath, and Maddie Whitaker, mud to her chest, her hands in rags, swaying on her feet, from a night that should have killed her, looked up at the most powerful man in the territory in front of the whole town that had laughed her off its platform 3 days before, and she said the last thing any of them expected, and the only thing that could have finished him. She smiled at him, kindly, almost with pity. "You called me deadweight, Mr. Crowder," she said. "You rode all the way out here in the dark to watch me sink. I do hope you got your money's worth of the view. Now take your men and take your grinning friends and get off Caleb Rowan's water. It's been his the whole time. It just took a deadweight woman climbing a dead ridge to prove it. Elias Crowder rode off his own ambush at a walk because a man cannot gallop away from a crowd. He brought himself without looking like exactly what he was. And Maddie Whitaker stood in the churned dirt and watched him go until he was small on the flat. And then her knees quit. She did not fall. She would have died before she fell in front of that crowd. She simply reached out quite calm and took hold of Caleb's forearm and said, "I believe I'll sit down now, Mr. Rowan, if it's all the same to you." And the whole of it went out of her at once, 2 nights without sleep. A spring dug open with her bare hands, a lifetime of holding her back straight, while the world laughed, and Caleb caught her before she reached the ground. "I've got you." His arm went around her, and for once, she didn't argue about being held. "Tom, the wagon get it round here, Mrs. Cobb." "I've got the door," Mrs. Cobb said, already moving the baby shifted to one hip. "Get her inside out of this sun before it finishes what the night started. You there, Harmon, make yourself useful for once in your worthless life, and help him lift her." And Del Harmon, who 3 days before had asked how much she weighed for the horse, came forward red-faced and got his shoulder under Maddie's other arm and helped carry her to the wagon, and nobody in that crowd said a single word about it, because there was nothing left to say. The show they'd ridden out to see had turned into something none of them had a joke for. Maddie was aware of most of it in a gray, floating way. She was aware of being got into the house and onto the bed that had been Caleb's and was now to be hers over her protest, which nobody heeded. She was aware of Mrs. Cobb unwrapping her ruined hands and drawing a sharp breath and then not saying anything about how bad they were, which told Maddie exactly how bad they were. She was aware of Caleb standing in the doorway of his own room, with his hat in his hands, not knowing what to do with himself, looking at her like a man looks at the one thing standing between him and the dark. "Go see to your herd," she told him, or tried to. "Go count them, every head, water them slow off the new creek, don't let them founder on it after a dry spell." "The herd can count itself for 1 day," Caleb said. "You've done enough. For God's sake, woman, you've done enough." "There's no such thing as enough," Maddie murmured, already going under. "There's only done and not done yet." And she slept. She slept the rest of that day and the night and half the next day, which had never once happened to her in her adult life. And when she woke, it was to the smell of somebody else's cooking badly done, and the sound of Tom in the yard telling somebody the whole story of the night at the top of his lungs, for what was plainly not the first time. Her hands were the worst of it. When she tried to sit up, she found them wrapped thick in clean linen, and when she flexed them, the pain took her breath, and she understood she'd not be gripping a shovel or a knife or much of anything for weeks. Mrs. Cobb was there in the chair by the bed mending. "You're still here," Maddie said. "Somebody had to be. Caleb Rowan can turn a herd and dig a spring, but he can't boil water without scorching it, and Jonah's got 1 arm, and that boy'd feed you nails and call it stew." Mrs. Cobb set down her mending. "I sent my young ones to my sisters and I stayed. You'd have done the same. You'd have done more. You did do more for a whole town that never lifted a finger for you." She looked at Maddie steady. "So don't argue. You're not fit, and there's no shame in not being fit after what you did. And if you try to get up and cook, I'll sit on you and we both know how that'd end." Maddie laughed, which hurt and stopped. "How's the town?" she asked. "After." Mrs. Cobb's mouth twisted. "About how you'd think. Split 3 ways. There's them that are ashamed and can't hardly look at their own boots. There's them pretending real hard they never laughed at all, that they always knew you was something special." She snorted. "And there's the ones with sense enough to be scared because a town that's built 50 years of its dealings around Elias Crowder just found out the ground under Crowder was never his. And now every soul who ever took his side or borrowed his money or looked away from what he did is lying awake, wondering what comes next." "And what does come next?" Maddie said. Mrs. Cobb didn't answer right away. She picked her mending back up, and her hands weren't quite steady on it. And that was how Maddie knew the trouble wasn't over before Mrs. Cobb said a word. "A man came," Mrs. Cobb said finally. "Yesterday while you slept. From the territorial capital. Fine coat, soft hands, papers in a leather case. Lawyer." She looked up. "Crowder's lawyer. He's filed a challenge to the deed. Says it's a forgery. Says his words, a destitute, unmarried woman of no fixed situation produced a convenient document to defraud an honest cattleman of his rightful water. And he's asked the territorial court to hold the spring pending trial and freeze the use of it, and her jaw tightened. And he's asked that you be held for questioning on a charge of fraud. Maddie lay very still. Of course he did, she said softly. I beat him in front of a crowd, so he's taking it somewhere there's no crowd. A courtroom in the Capitol 3 days ride off in front of a judge who's likely dined at Crowder's table, arguing whether a fat, unmarried stranger could possibly have come by an honest deed. She closed her eyes a moment. I embarrassed him, Mrs. Cobb. That was my mistake. I should have beaten him quiet and let him keep his face. A shamed man goes home. A humiliated one goes to war. She opened her eyes. Where's Caleb? Where do you think? Down at the water out of his mind, trying to figure how to fight a capital lawyer with no money and a hired cook laid up in his bed. Get him, and get Jonah, and send Tom for the county clerk, the one who read the deed. If Crowder's already reaching for him, I want to reach him first. Maddie was pushing herself upright against the pain, her bandaged hands useless using her elbows. Help me to the table. I can't dig and I can't cook, but by the Lord I can still think, and thinking's the only tool this fight was ever going to need. They gathered at the table within the hour. Caleb hollow-eyed Jonah with his arm in a sling Mrs. Cobb had made him. Tom hovering. Mrs. Cobb pouring coffee, and Maddie at the head of it with her ruined hands laid useless in her lap, and her mind going like a mill. Tell me exactly what the lawyer's paper says, she told Caleb. Word for word, best you can, Caleb told her. And when he got to the part about holding her for questioning, his voice went rough, and he set his fist on the table. I won't allow it. They'll not take you off this ranch. You'll do nothing that lands you in a cell beside me, because then who runs the ranch? Maddie said it flat. Listen, he's made 3 moves, and every one of them tells me what he's afraid of. He wants the deed called a forgery. That means he can't attack the water or the timber directly, so he's attacking the paper. He wants the spring frozen. That means the running water frightens him every day. It runs is a day the story spreads. And he wants me hauled off for questioning. She looked around the table. That means he wants me gone from here more than he wants anything, because as long as I'm on this ranch, I keep being the proof that a nobody saw through him. 3 moves, 3 fears. So we answer each one, and we answer it faster than a soft-handed lawyer expects a broke rancher and a laid-up cook to move. How? Jonah said. We got no money and no lawyer and no time. We've got better than a lawyer. We've got the truth, and we've got witnesses, and we've got a document that isn't a forgery. Maddie turned to Caleb. The deed's real, which means it was filed, which means there is a copy of it, the original filing, sitting in the Territorial Land Office in that same capital in a book with the same date and the same seal. A forged deed has no twin in the government's own records. A real one does. If we get the land office to certify their copy matches ours, the whole forgery charge dies in an afternoon. She looked at the clerk's empty chair, then at Tom. Which is why I need that county clerk today, before Crowder's money gets to him. Because the county clerk can send a wire to the Capitol Land Office and ask them to pull the original filing, and a wire travels faster than a lawyer's threats. And if Crowder's already bought the clerk? Mrs. Cobb asked. Then we find out today while there's still time to do something about it instead of at trial when there isn't. Maddie's face was grim. Go get him, Tom. Tell him Maddie Whitaker asks him to come, and tell him she said to remind him that he stood in front of the whole county and called that deed in order with his own mouth. A man who said a true thing out loud in front of witnesses has already spent the coin of his good name on it. I just want to make sure he remembers he spent it. The county clerk came. His name was Hollis, and he came nervous, turning his hat in his hands in the doorway, and Maddie saw at once that Crowder had already gotten to him or near enough. Miss Whitaker, I'm glad you're on the mend. He wouldn't quite meet her eye. You'll understand I'm in a difficult position. There's a challenge filed. In my official capacity, I have to be impartial. I can't be seen to take a side. Mr. Crowder's lawyer was very clear on that point. Was he? Maddie's voice was gentle. Sit down, Mr. Hollis. I really can't stay." "Sit down." Still gentle, but there was iron under it now, and Hollis sat. "Mr. Hollis, 3 mornings ago you took a deed in your hand in front of the entire town, and you read it out, and you said with your own mouth in your official capacity, those are your words, I believe, that it appeared in order. Do you remember saying that?" The circumstances were. Do you remember saying it, yes or no, in front of Mrs. Cobb here and Mr. Pryor and the whole gathered county?" Hollis swallowed. "I remember." "Then here is your difficult position, and I'll lay it out plain, because I think you're a decent man in a hard spot, and decent men do better with the truth than with comfort." Maddie leaned forward, her bandaged hands on the table. "If that deed is real, and you help prove it real, you're the honest county clerk who stood up to a rich man's bought lawyer. Songs practically write themselves. But if that deed is real, Mr. Hollis, and you drag your feet, or you go conveniently impartial, or you let that timber evidence get misplaced somewhere between here and the Capitol, and then the land office certifies it real anyway, which it will, because it is." She let that sink in. "Then you're the county clerk who read a true deed out loud in front of the whole town, and then tried to bury it for Crowder's money after. And there is no song for that man, sir. There's only the version of him that every soul in this county tells their grandchildren about forever, as a warning." The room was silent. Hollis had gone pale. "All I am asking," Maddie went on softer now, "is that you do the one thing your office exists to do. Send a wire to the Territorial Land Office. Ask them to pull the original filing for this parcel and certify whether it matches the deed you already read and called in order. That's not taking a side, Mr. Hollis. That's the opposite of taking a side. That's letting the record speak and standing out of its way." She sat back. "A forger would beg you not to send that wire. I'm begging you to send it today before noon, before Crowder's lawyer thinks to have the Capitol office lose the book. Does an innocent woman act like that, or a guilty one?" Hollis looked at her a long moment. Then he stood and set his hat on his head, and for the first time he met her eye square. "I'll send it before noon," he said. "God help me, and God help my little office, but I read that deed out loud and I meant it, and I'll not be the man in your story." He went to the door and paused. "There's a thing you should know, Miss Whitaker, since you've been straight with me. Crowder's lawyer didn't come alone. He brought Reese with him, your old hand. Crowder's put him up in the Capitol and dressed him fine, and the plan is Reese testifies that he saw you plant that timber yourself, that you dug up the spring, drove that wood in it, and dug it back out for a show to gin up a false claim." Hollis grimaced. "It's a filthy lie. But Reese was your hand, and he'll swear he saw it, and a jury doesn't know his heart. It's your word against a man who worked your own land. And there it was, the trap under the trap." Maddie sat with it, and around the table, the hope that had been building drained out of every face. "Reese," Caleb said, low and dangerous. "That gutless is the best thing that's happened to us since the water came up," Maddie said. They stared at her. "Think," she said. "Crowder's whole story is that the timber's a fake I planted. But Reese worked this ranch 2 years, up until 3 days ago. If Reese swears the timber's new planted, then Reese is swearing that black-rotted 50-year-old wood is fresh, and any fool with eyes and a knife can see that timber's older than Reese's own father. He's put his lying witness on the one point his witness can be caught out on by a pocket knife." She almost smiled. "But more than that, Reese knows things. Reese cut the salt and fouled the tank and opened the fences on Crowder's pay. He is Crowder's proof of everything Crowder did to us. Crowder's brought his own worst witness to the Capitol and dressed him in a fine coat, and all we have to do is get to Reese first and offer him the one thing Crowder can't. Which is," Jonah said, "a way out that doesn't end with him hanging for sabotage." Maddie's eyes were bright now, the fever of the fight burning clean through the exhaustion. "Right now, Reese thinks his only road is to lie for Crowder and hope Crowder protects him. But Crowder doesn't protect people, he uses them and buries them. Reese ought to know that better than anyone." So somebody rides to the Capitol, finds Reese before the trial, and tells him the plain truth that the land office wire is going to prove the deed real, no matter what he swears, that the timber's going to prove 50 years old, no matter what he swears, and that when Crowder loses, and Crowder is going to lose, the only man standing there holding a fresh confession of fence cutting and waterfowling and salt poisoning is going to be Reese, not Crowder. Crowder will say he never told Reese to do a thing, and Reese will hang alone for all of it. She let that land. Or Reese can come home and tell the truth about who paid him and why, and testify to the sabotage and take his lumps for his part, but keep his neck, because a man who turns and tells the truth gets mercy, and a man who lies for a thief to the bitter end gets the rope meant for two. Caleb was staring at her. You'd let Reese off. After what he did to us, you'd let him walk with a light sentence to nail Crowder. I'd rather nail the man who paid for the crime than the poor devil he paid to do it, Maddie said quietly. Reese cut our fence, but Crowder cut Reese and the Cobbs and the Selbys and the Vances and your family for 2 generations, and he did it in a fine coat with clean hands and called himself blessed. If letting a weak man off light is the price of bringing a wicked man down hard, then I'll pay it and sleep fine. Justice isn't about hurting everybody who did wrong the same. It's about hurting the right one worst. She looked at Caleb. Someone has to ride to the Capitol, today, and it has to be someone Reese won't just spit on. Someone he's afraid of a little, and ashamed in front of more. That's me, Caleb said. That's you? Maddie held his eyes. But hear me, Caleb Rowan. You go to talk, not to fight. You get one thing from Reese, the truth in front of a lawyer we can trust, or a judge's clerk written down and signed. You do not lay a hand on him, no matter what he says about me, no matter how he grins. Because the second you hit him, his lie gets legs, and Crowder's got his story of the violent rancher and the fraud cook. Can you do that? Can you let a man who tried to bury you walk right up to your face and grin and keep your fists at your sides? Because the ranch needs you to. Caleb was quiet a long moment. You're asking a lot. I'm asking you to be the man who wrote his own letter, Maddie said. The one out of everything but his manners. That man could do it. Caleb stood. He took his hat off the peg. I'll bring back his confession, he said, or I'll bring back nothing. But I'll not bring back trouble. On my word. He paused at the door and looked back at her, laid up and bandaged at the head of his table, running his ranch and his war from a chair. You ought to have been born a General Maddie Whitaker. I was, Maddie said. Nobody'd give me an army, so I make do with a rancher, an old man, a boy, and a widow, and it turns out that's plenty. What happened in the Capitol, Maddie would only hear told after. But it went like this. Caleb found Reese in a boarding house 2 streets off the courthouse, in a room Crowder's money had paid for in a coat. Crowder's money had bought, and Reese opened the door and saw who it was, and the fear crossed his face before the sneer could cover it. Come to hit me, Rowan! Reese leaned in the doorway, recovering insolent. Go on, do it. Give the judge something to hang your fat cook's story on. That's what she sent you for, ain't it? She's got you fetching and begging now like the rest of 'em. Caleb's hands were fists. He looked at them. He made them not be fists. It was the hardest thing he'd done that wasn't turning a herd in a storm. I didn't come to hit you, he said. I came to talk. 5 minutes. Then I'll go whatever you decide. Reese laughed, but he let him in because a man who's already scared can't help wanting to hear what the thing he's scared of has to say. Caleb didn't sit. He stood in that small paid-for room, and he told Reese the plain arithmetic of it in Maddie's own order, the way she'd drilled him. The wire to the land office already sent, already answered the filing, already being pulled. The deed would prove real, and no swearing could unprove it. The timber black and rotted that any carpenter would date at 50 years. Reese's own testimony that it was freshly planted would break the second a knife touched the wood, and break Reese with it in front of the court as a proven liar. And then the last of it, cold and quiet. When it all comes down, Reese and it's coming down Crowder walks. He'll stand up in that clean coat and say he never told you to cut a fence or foul a tank or touch a grain of salt. He'll say you were a disgruntled hand acting alone. and there won't be one scrap of paper to say otherwise because a man like Crowder never signs the order, he only pays the man who does. Caleb let it sit. You'll hang for all of it. Alone. His crimes done by your hands, and him 3 streets over at his supper. That's the road you're on. That's the whole of what lying for him buys you. Reese had stopped sneering. He'd gone gray. You don't know that. I know Crowder. So do you. You've watched him bury 4 families the same way, used and dropped. Ask yourself why you think you'd be the first one he carried. Caleb picked up his hat. There's another road. You come home. You tell the truth who paid you what for all of it signed. You take your lumps for your part, and they'll be real. I won't lie to you, but you keep your neck, because a man who turns and tells the truth gets mercy from a court, and a man who lies to the last gets the rope. Mercy. Reese spat the word. From who? From you, after what I'd done to your place. And here Caleb did the one thing Maddie hadn't told him to. Not from me, he said. From her. Maddie. She's the one arguing for it. He watched Reese's face. She sat at my table 3 days back with her hands dug down to raw meat from saving the ranch you tried to help kill, and when I said we ought to see you hang for your part, she said no. Called you a poor devil a wicked man had used. Said she'd rather nail the one who paid than the one who was paid. She spent her own breath hurting as she was begging mercy for the man who cut her fences. Caleb put his hat on. I don't understand it either. But that's the woman you called dead weight. She's up in a sickbed right now spending what strength she's got trying to keep your neck out of a noose, and you're down here in Crowder's coat fixing to swear her into a fraud charge. You do what you want with that. I've said my 5 minutes. He got to the door before Reese made a sound. It wasn't words at first. It was a kind of broken breath, the sound a hard man makes when the one thing he had no armor for gets under all of it at once. Reese sat down on the paid-for bed, in the paid-for coat, and put his face in his hands. She really said that, he said. About mercy. She really... On my word. Reese was quiet a long time. When he lifted his face it was wet, and it was decided. Get the magistrate's clerk, he said hoarsely. Get him now tonight before I lose the nerve or Crowder's man comes by. I'll sign the whole of it. Every crime and his name on every one. He wiped his face with the sleeve of Crowder's coat and looked at it like it disgusted him. And I'll give this coat back to him myself. I'd sooner freeze. Caleb rode for the capital that afternoon, and the waiting began, and the waiting was the hardest part, because there was nothing more Maddie could do. The wire was sent. Hollis was as good as his word, and he came by the second day to say the Capital Land Office had confirmed receipt and would pull the filing, though the certification would take some days. Caleb was 3 days ride out, and 3 back best case, and no word could come from him faster than he could come himself. And Maddie, who had built her whole life on being the one who did the thing herself, had to sit at a table with useless hands and let other people carry it, and she found that harder than any ridge. It was in that waiting that Jonah Pike did the thing he'd been working himself up to. He came in of an evening while Mrs. Cobb was out at the well, and he stood in the doorway a while, and then he crossed to the table, and he set something down on it in front of Maddie. A pair of work gloves. Good ones, the best a working man owns, oiled and broken in and cared for. Over years, the kind a man doesn't lend and doesn't lose. Maddie looked at them. She looked at Jonah. Figured you wore yours out. Jonah said gruffly, not meeting her eye. Savin' the rest of us. He cleared his throat. Your hands'll mend. Doctor says so. But they'll be tender a long while, and a body can't work tender hands bare. So. He nudged the gloves an inch closer with one finger, the way a man does when the gesture's costing him more than he can say. These held up 51 years of my foolishness. Reckon they've got it in 'em to hold a better person than me. And Maddie Whitaker, who had not wept when the town laughed at her, nor when the storekeeper cheated her, nor when the cruelest man in the territory called her dead weight to her face. Maddie looked at an old man's best gloves lying on the table where he'd set them down, rather than trust his voice to hand them over, and her eyes filled and she could not stop them. Jonah Pike. She got out. "I can't shake your hand. Look at the state of mine." "Then don't," Jonah said, and his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "We'll call it square without the shakin'. Been enough shakin' this week to last us." And he went back out to the yard fast, before either of them could disgrace themselves further, and Maddie sat and held the gloves against her chest with her bandaged hands, and understood that she had somewhere in 3 impossible days stopped being the woman they'd laughed at and become something none of them had a word for, but all of them would have died for. Caleb came back on the 6th day, near dark on a spent horse, and he came into the house without a word and put a folded paper on the table in front of Maddie, and then he sat down hard because he'd ridden most of 2 days without real sleep. Maddie couldn't unfold it with her hands. "Read it to me," she said. "I've earned the pleasure of hearing it." Caleb read it. It was Reese's confession sworn witnessed by a capital magistrate's clerk and signed in Reese's own careful hand. That he had been in the pay of Elias Crowder. That on Crowder's instruction and Crowder's money, he had cut the salt with ash, fouled the holding tank with carrion, and opened the west fence by night on 4 occasions to scatter the herd. That the timber in the spring was old black and rotted, and that he, Reese, had never seen Maddie Whitaker or anyone else place it there, and that Crowder's lawyer had coached him to swear otherwise, and promised him money and protection to do it. The room was silent when Caleb finished. "How'd he take it?" Maddie said at last. "When you told him about the mercy, like it was the one blow he had no guard for." Caleb rubbed his face. The fear couldn't move him. He'd faced Crowder's kind of fear his whole life. But you arguing for him with your hands in rags that broke him clean in 2. He signed that night. Gave the coat back the next morning. Said he'd sooner freeze. He looked at her. "You brought him down with a kindness, Maddie. I watched it happen, and I still don't rightly understand it." Maddie was quiet. "Mercy's the one weapon a man like Crowder's never learned to fight," she said finally. "Because he's never once used it. He doesn't know the counter to it. You hand a cruel man's tool a piece of unearned kindness, and it takes the fight clean out of him every time." She looked at the confession she couldn't hold. "It's over then. Nearly. The land office confirms the deed. This confession sinks the forgery lie, and the fake witness both, and the timber, and the fences, and the poison tank all come home to Crowder's own door." She let out a long breath. "He'll not go to prison. Men like him don't. But he'll pay damages, real ones, for the cattle and the sabotage and the fraud filing, and worse than the money, the whole territory now knows what he is, and knows it from a court record in ink forever. The waterman built on stolen water. His granddaddy's crime and his own both hung around his neck in the county book. That's a heavier sentence than any cell for a man whose whole self was his good name. And that was how it fell out in the weeks that followed. The territorial court, faced with a certified land office filing that matched the deed, a signed confession from Crowder's own bought witness, and a 50-year-old timber that no honest carpenter in the county would call anything but ancient, threw out the forgery challenge. Dismissed the fraud charge against Maddie before it was ever properly filed, and ordered Elias Crowder to pay damages to Caleb Rowan for the destroyed cattle, the sabotage, and the malicious suit, a sum large enough to make even Crowder feel it. The inquiry into the old dammed springs across the valley was opened and would grind on for a year, but the direction of it was plain from the first day, and men who had spent 50 years tipping their hats to Crowder now crossed the street when they saw him coming. His power didn't vanish overnight. Power like that never does. But it cracked, and everyone could see the crack, and a cracked thing among men who've stopped being afraid of it does not stay whole for long. And the town changed the way towns do, slowly, unevenly, and never all at once. Some stayed ashamed and kept their distance, which suited Maddie fine. Some overcorrected into a fawning friendliness that she found more tiresome than the cruelty had been, and she was polite to them and trusted them not at all. And some, the ones with real bottom to them, simply began quietly to treat her as though she had always been a person worth treating well, and asked no credit for the change, and those she came to count as neighbors. Pryor the storekeeper sold her salt at a fair price, and never once looked at the window while he did it, which was as close to an apology as a narrow man like Pryor had in him, and Maddie accepted it as one. Del Harmon never did apologize. But one market day months on, Maddie caught him about to make some remark to a stranger at the rail about the woman running the Rowan outfit, and caught him stopping himself mid-breath, going red and turning away. And she decided that a cruel man, learning to swallow his own cruelty, even just from fear of the fool he'd look, was its own slow kind of justice, and she let him keep his hide. Crowder came to the ranch one last time. He came alone near the end of it after the ruling and the damages and the crossing of the street, when his empire had cracked past mending, and the whole valley knew it. He rode up on a fine horse, gone dull in the coat from a master who'd stopped caring for anything, and he sat it in the yard, and he did not dismount. And Maddie came out onto the porch in Jonah's gloves and did not ask him down. "I wanted to see it for myself," Crowder said. His voice had lost its ease. "The water, running. On land I was born believing was mine by right." He looked past her up toward the ridge where the creek ran silver. 50 years my family told that story, that the water fell to us and the rock fell to the Rowans, and that was God's own arrangement of things. My grandfather told it. My father. I believed it the way you believe your own name. His jaw worked. And a woman I'd never met that I laughed at off a train dug up the truth of my whole life in 3 days with her bare hands. Maddie said nothing. She'd learned when silence did more than any word. "Aren't you going to gloat?" Crowder said. "You've earned it. Go on. I called you dead weight in this very yard. Say the thing. I'd say it in your place." "No, you wouldn't," Maddie said quietly. "You'd have crushed me and forgotten me by supper. That's the difference between us, that you've never once seen Mr. Crowder, and it's the difference that beat you." She came to the edge of the porch. "I'm not going to gloat. I don't have it in me, and I wouldn't spend it on you if I did. But I'll tell you the one true thing since you rode all this way to hear something." She looked at him steady. "You didn't lose because I was clever though I am. You didn't lose because your witness turned though he did. You lost because you built your whole self on top of a lie your grandfather buried in the dark, and you spent your life so sure of it you never once thought to look under the water. Nobody stole your empire from you, sir. It was never standing on anything. I just came along and pointed at the ground, and the whole county looked down at the same time." She let that settle. "That's not cruelty. That's just what's so. And I find I'm not sorry for it, but I'm not glad of your ruin either. I've buried too much to take joy in a man losing everything, even a man who tried to bury me. So I'll say this and mean it. I hope you find something true to stand on before you're done. Everybody deserves that much, even you. But you'll not find it here. This water's come home." Crowder looked at her a long moment, and whatever he'd ridden out to find in her face, triumph, meanness, some cruelty, he could hate her cleanly, for he did not find it, and its absence seemed to unmake him more than any gloating could have. He gathered his reins. "You're a strange woman, Maddie Whitaker," he said. "So I've been told by better men than you, and worse. It stopped stinging around the time I stopped needing any of them to think otherwise." She tipped her head at the road. "Ride safe, Mr. Crowder. There's a lot of dry country between here and wherever a man goes when he's got nothing true left to stand on." He rode out, and he did not come back. And within the year, he'd sold off the last of the swallowed ranches at a loss and gone east, and the valley slowly gave the stolen springs back to the families they'd been stolen from. And Maddie's name came up in more than one of those homes as the woman who'd pointed at the ground. But that was later. That evening, she just watched him go small on the flat, the way she'd watched him go the morning of the crowd, and then she went back inside because there was work, and there was always work, and work was the one prayer she'd never stopped believing in. It was Caleb in the end who said the thing plainly on an evening after the court had ruled, and the ranch had begun cautiously to breathe. He'd been quiet through supper, working himself up to something the way a man does, and finally he set down his coffee and said, "I owe you wages, real ones. Months of them, and more coming now. The damages are paid, and the herd's fat, and the water's ours, free and clear." He turned his cup in his hands. "But wages don't cover it. A cook's wages for what you did. It'd be an insult to write it in the book like that. So I've been trying to find the right words, and I'm no good with words, so I'll just say it clumsy. He looked up. I want your name in the ledger, Maddie. Not as help. As the person who runs this place with me. Manager of the accounts, the livestock, records, the water, all of it. Your name written in beside mine. So it's yours on paper the way the deed's mine on paper. And no court, and no lawyer, and no cruel man can ever say different. He said it fast like he'd been holding it. Say yes, please. You've earned it 10 times over, and I've no pride left to pretend otherwise. Maddie was quiet for a long moment. Her hands were healing now, still stiff, laid on the table in Jonah's gloves, which she wore near everywhere. No, she said. Caleb's face fell so fast and so hard that she near laughed and did put her gloved hand over his to hold him before he could get the wrong idea and bolt. Not no to the work, she said. No to the way you've drawn it. You've offered me a fine title and a line in your book, and it's kindly meant, and I thank you for it. But it's still you giving and me taking. It's still your ranch and your ledger and your name and mine written in beside it because you were good enough to make room. She shook her head. I've spent my whole life being made room for by good men, fed at the corner of the table, given the narrow chair, written into somebody else's book in somebody else's hand as a kindness. And I am done, Caleb Rowan. Done being a kindness. Done being made room for. She leaned forward. This ranch does not survive on you being generous to me. It survives on the work being shared honest because it's too much for one man, and always was. You proved that over 2 years near dying of it. So I won't be your manager written into your book by your leave. If I stay, we run it together. Equal. Not because you're kind, but because it's true, and because neither one of us can do it alone, and we both of us know it now. She sat back. That's my counteroffer. Take it or keep your title. Caleb looked at her a long moment, and then slowly the fear went out of his face and something better came into it, something like a man who has just been offered more than he dared ask for, dressed up as a woman refusing him. Equal? He said. Equal. 2 names, same size, same hand, or I'll have the clerk write 'em both so nobody can say one's bigger. Now you're understanding me, Maddie said. Caleb stood. He went to the shelf and got down the ledger. The same cracked, damp, swollen book she'd found buried under his unpaid bills a lifetime and 3 weeks ago, and he opened it to a clean page, and he set it in front of her, and he put the pen in her stiff, healing, glove-warmed hand himself, closing his own hand gently around it to steady the grip her fingers couldn't yet manage alone. Then you write it first, he said. Your name goes in first, not because I'm being kind. His voice caught. Because it's true. This place'd be a ravine full of dead cattle, and a sole deed right now if you hadn't climbed a ridge nobody thought you could climb. It's yours before it's mine, whatever the deed says. So write it first. And Maddie Whitaker, with a good man's hand steadying hers, because her own could not yet hold the pen alone, and an old man's gloves warm on her aching fingers, and her name about to go into a ledger, not as a kindness, but as a fact. Looked down at the clean page for a long moment before she wrote and thought of every table she'd been fed, at the corner of every book she'd been left out of every room that had made room for her as a favor, and never once as a right. Then she wrote her name. First, full and plain and steady in her own hand with his hand under it. And it did not feel like being given anything at all. It felt like coming home to a place she had built. The ink dried in the book, and it did not fade, and that was the first thing Maddie Whitaker had to teach herself to trust. She half expected to wake the next morning and find it gone. Her name blotted out the whole of it. A fever dream of a woman 2 nights without sleep. So she came to the table before the others were up with her stiff hands in Jonah's gloves, and she opened the book to the page. And there it was. Her name. First. Full and plain. And under it, in the same careful size, because Caleb had made her write both, so no clerk could ever claim one was bigger his own. She sat and looked at it a long while. Then she closed the book gentle, the way you close a door on a room you mean to keep. The summer that had near killed the ranch turned by slow degrees into the summer that made it. The water did the first of it. Cold Betty ran and did not stop, and where she ran, the ground remembered what it was for, and along the lower creek the grass came up the right kind of green. At last, not the dying yellow, Maddie had read off the land from the wagon that first day, but a deep, good color that put weight on cattle just to look at it. The thin herd that had staggered through the drought grew sleek. The calves that had gone down in the heat came back up. The little roan Maddie had drenched with yarrow and sage grew into a stout young steer that would follow her along the fence like a dog, and Tom named him Lucky and swore he understood English. And the work came faster than 4 people, and 1 bad arm could carry it, which was the best trouble a ranch could have, so they hired. The first 2 hands rode in off the news of the water word had traveled the way it does, that the Rowan place had come back from the dead and paid its wages honest and on time. The elder of the 2 was a steady middle-aged man named Deakins, who'd lost his own place to a bad winter and asked few questions. The younger was a big, cocky, sunburned boy of maybe 22, named Friel, who came off his horse in the yard, looked around at the running water, and the fat cattle looked at Caleb and then looked at Maddie, standing on the porch in her apron, and Jonah's gloves, and made the mistake that every stranger to that ranch made exactly once. "Reckon I'll take my orders from you then," he said to Caleb, jerking a thumb at Maddie, "and leave the kitchen business to the missus." The yard went quiet. Tom winced. Deakins, who'd been on the place all of 4 minutes, took a small step away from the boy like a man stepping back from something about to go off. Caleb didn't even turn around. "Son," he said mildly, "you'll take your orders from whichever of us is closest, and right now that's her. And if you've got a notion that the person who dug the water you're about to drink is the one you can safely sass, you're going to have a real educational summer." Maddie came down off the porch. Slow. She always came slow, and she'd long since stopped apologizing for it, and something about the unhurried way she crossed the yard made the big boy shift his feet. "What's your name?" she said. "Friel, ma'am." "Friel, you know how to read land?" "I reckon I know cattle some." "That's not what I asked. Can you look at a pasture and tell me what's killing it before it's dead? Can you taste a barrel of salt and tell me if it'll cure or rot? Can you tell a sick calf from a resting one at 40 feet, or find water in ground 3 counties have called dead?" She let each one land. "Because those are the things that run this ranch, Mr. Friel, not the size of a body nor the strength of a back. Knowing and being willing. You've got a strong back, I can see that, and we can use it, and I'll pay it fair. But the day you decide your back makes you smarter than the person who saved this place is the day you find out how fast a strong back can be walking back down that road to find a ranch that'll have it." She held out one gloved hand. "Now, you want the job or not? It's honest work and good grub, and the only rule that matters is you don't ever again in your life make the mistake of measuring a person by the space they take up. I'll not have it on this land. We've all of us had a bellyful of it." Friel looked at the hand. He looked at Caleb, who wasn't going to help him. He looked at old Jonah, who was grinning like Christmas. And then he took the hand and shook it careful and said, "Yes, ma'am, and I'm sorry for the mouth. My mother'd have boxed my ears." "Your mother sounds like good people," Maddie said. "Barn's that way. Deakins'll show you. Supper's at 6 and you'll want to be washed for it." And that was how it went from then on. The ranch grew, and every soul who came onto it learned the one rule inside a day, and the ones who couldn't learn it didn't stay. And slowly the Rowan outfit became known not just for its water and its fat cattle, but for the woman who ran it and the strange, stubborn dignity of the place she'd made. But a thing Maddie could not so easily teach herself was how to believe it would last. Mrs. Cobb was the one who caught it. She'd stayed on her children back from the sisters, the 2 older ones earning small wages doing chores, the baby underfoot, and adored by everybody. And she and Maddie had settled into the easy shorthand of 2 women who'd stood in a mercantile once, and each seen the other refuse to break. So it was Mrs. Cobb who noticed one morning tidying the room that was Maddie's, now that the canvas bag was still packed. Not put away in a trunk. Packed. half-packed and ready the way a body keeps a bag who's learned never to be caught without one tucked under the bed within reach. "Maddie," Mrs. Cobb held it up. "You've been here 2 months. Your name's in the book. Why is your bag still packed?" Maddie's face did a thing it almost never did. It faltered. "Habit," she said. "That's not habit. Habit's where you leave your boots. This is a woman keeping one foot out the door." Mrs. Cobb set the bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, which for Mrs. Cobb was as good as a sermon. "You saved this place. You outfought a man who'd have crushed you. You've got 100 hands who'd walk through fire on your say-so, and you're still sleeping like you might have to run before dawn." She wasn't unkind about it. "Who packed that bag, Maddie, the first time, when you were young?" Maddie was quiet a long moment. "After my husband died," she said finally low. "His people took the farm. It was in his name, and I was just the widow. No children living to hold my place. They gave me a week to be gone. I packed that bag in a week, and I've never fully unpacked it since in 11 years, and I don't know how many houses. Because every one of them, sooner or later, somebody looked at me and decided I was a burden they'd rather not carry, and I'd rather be already packed than have to scramble." She looked at her hands. "You keep a bag ready, you never have to feel the floor go out from under you. You've just got your feet under you already." Mrs. Cobb didn't say anything soft, because they weren't soft women, and softness would have shamed them both. She just said practical as a nail. "Well, this floor's not going anywhere. It's got your name under it now in ink that didn't fade. So you might unpack the bag or you might not. That's your business, but you ought to at least know you're keeping it packed out of an old habit and not a true one. There's a difference, like you're always telling the rest of us, between what a thing was and what it is now." And she set the bag back under the bed, and she left it to Maddie to decide which was the kindest thing she could have done, and she went out to hang the wash. Maddie did not unpack the bag that day, but she thought about it. It was around that same time that Caleb started disappearing into the barn of an evening. Maddie noticed the way she noticed everything. After supper, he'd take a lantern and go out, and there'd be the sound of sawing and planing and low cursing, and he'd come in late with sawdust in his beard and say nothing about it, and if she asked, he'd just say, "Fixin' something," which from a man who'd let the whole ranch rot for 2 years was suspicious on its face. She let it be for the better part of 2 weeks. Partly because she had her hands full. Literally, her hands were mending but slow, and she'd taken to directing more and doing less, which chafed her worse than the blisters had. And partly because a piece of her, the packed bag piece, was afraid of what a man building something in secret might turn out to mean. She'd had men build things for her before that turned out to be cages. Then one evening Caleb came in, and he didn't have sawdust in his beard, and he stood in the doorway turning his hat in his hands the way he did when a thing was too big for him to say straight, and he said, "Come out to the porch a minute, if your feet'll carry you." "My feet carry me fine," Maddie said, which was half a lie, and she went. There was a chair on the porch. It hadn't been there that morning. It was new made, the wood still pale and smelling of cut pine, and it was wider than any chair Maddie had ever been offered in her life, and deep and low, with arms set far enough apart, and a seat built strong enough that a body could sink down into it, and know without the sick lurch of doubt that had shadowed her toward every chair in every room for 32 years that it would hold, that it would not creak a warning, that it would not narrow its arms against her, that it would not announce her to a room. Maddie stood and looked at it and could not speak. "I know it ain't much," Caleb said fast into her silence, misreading it. "The joints could be cleaner. I'm a rancher, not a carpenter, and I did it 3 times before I got the anyway. I noticed you never sit long. On the porch. Everybody sits on the porch of an evening, but you stand or you perch on the step. And I got to thinking on why, and He stopped. He made himself slow down. "I got to thinking that a person who spent her whole life not trusting chairs ought to have one chair, at least one in this whole world, that she never has to think about, that she can just sit down in without doing the arithmetic first. So," he gestured at it awkward, "it's yours. I built it to your measure. I didn't ask because I didn't want to make a thing of it. A body oughtn't have to ask for a chair that fits. And Maddie Whitaker, who had run a war from a sickbed with her hands in rags, who had faced a laughing town and a cruel man and a 50-year lie without her voice so much as shaking, sat down slowly in the chair a man had built to hold her and felt it take her weight without a sound, without a warning, without a single one of the small daily humiliations she had long ago stopped even naming to herself. And she put her gloved hands over her face, and she wept. Caleb near panicked. "Maddie, is it wrong? I can build it again. I can—" "Sit down and hush, you fool man," she got out through her hands. "You built it right. That's the whole trouble with it. You built it exactly right." He sat down on the step beside her chair, because there was no other, and he didn't touch her, and he let her cry, and after a while she took her hands from her face and looked out at the ranch going gold in the evening, the water shining on the ridge, the cattle fat along the creek, and she laughed wet and shaky. "You want to know a thing I've never told a living soul," she said. "If you want to tell it. My whole life the worst of it was never the words. The circus, the deadweight, the block and tackle words are just barking. I learned to let them go past." She pressed her hand flat on the wide arm of the chair. "The worst of it was chairs. Church pews I didn't dare sit in. The good chairs at other women's tables that I'd wave off and say I'd rather stand, so I'd not have to see the look if one gave under me. 32 years of doing the arithmetic before I'd trust my own weight to a thing meant for sitting. 32 years of being made to feel my own body was a question the furniture might answer wrong." She turned and looked at him. "And you noticed. Not the words anybody could hear the words. You noticed the thing I never said out loud to anyone, that I don't sit. And you built me the answer without making me ask the question." Her voice broke again. "Nobody has ever in my life noticed the thing I didn't say, Caleb Rowan. Not once. Not my husband, God rest him. Not my mother. You built me a chair." Caleb was quiet a moment. "I notice you," he said simply. "Turns out it's the easiest thing I do all day." They sat with that, the two of them, in the evening, and neither said anything more because some things are worse for being talked at, and the chair had already said the whole of it. The town, of course, had opinions about the arrangement. It could not help itself. A widow and a bachelor living on the same ranch unmarried her name in his book, his chair built to her measure on his porch. A thing like that was meat and drink to a place like Mercy Flats, and Maddie knew the talk was going around long before she heard the shape of it, because she always knew. She'd braced for it. She'd been braced for it her whole life, one version or another. And so when Tom came in one afternoon and said uneasy, "Ma'am, the Reverend's ridden out. He's hitching up now. He asked was Mr. Rowan to home?" Maddie felt the old floor tip under her, and her eyes went for one bad second to the packed bag under the bed. Here it is, she thought. Here's the part where a good man of God explains to me kindly that a woman like me living where I've no marriage license to live makes a scandal, and the decent thing, the Christian thing would be for me to move along before I shame the man who saved me a chair. She'd heard versions of that speech before. She knew the tune. She met the Reverend on the porch, standing not in her chair, standing because some habits die hard, and she wasn't about to be run off out of a chair. And Caleb came up from the corral, wiping his hands, and the three of them stood there, and the Reverend, a mild old man named Ames, took off his hat and looked from one of them to the other, and got plainly to whatever he'd ridden out to say. "I'll not dress it up," Ames said. "There's talk in town about the two of you. You both know there is. And a man in my position gets asked sooner or later to come out and say a word about it." He turned his hat in his hands. "So here's my word, and it's the only one I've got, and the town can make of it what it likes." He looked at Maddie. "I buried 4 families' worth of hope in this valley over the years watching Elias Crowder pick them off one at a time, and I never once found the nerve to say from my own pulpit what everybody in the pews already knew. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself a great many comfortable things." His old voice roughened. "And then a stranger got off a train and got laughed at by half my congregation, and inside of a week, she'd done what none of us did in 50 years. She pointed at the ground and made us look. He put his hat back on. So I did not ride out here to lecture you, ma'am, about propriety. I rode out to say that if it would be any use to you, if it would settle the talk, or if it would suit you for your own reasons, I would be honored past what I can say to marry the two of you whenever and if ever you like. And if you'd rather never marry at all and run this ranch as partners, and let the whole town choke on its own gossip, then I'll defend your right to it from my own pulpit, and I'll do it loud, because I owe this valley one sermon with some nerve in it, and I'd be proud to make it that one. He nodded. That's all. I'll not intrude further. Good day to you both. And he got back on his horse and rode off, leaving Maddie and Caleb standing on the porch in a silence gone suddenly very large. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Well, Caleb said, finally careful. That went a different direction than your face was braced for. It surely did. Maddie let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding 11 years. I had a whole speech ready, about how I'd not be run off, and how a woman's got a right to earn her keep without a ring to license it. She shook her head. Now I've got a speech and nowhere to put it. Caleb turned his hat in his hands, turned it and turned it. And Maddie, who read men the way she read land, watched him work up to the largest thing he'd ever tried to say, and she found her own heart going hard in her chest. And she let him get there, in his own time, because he'd let her get up that ridge in hers. I'm no good at this, Caleb said. I told you. I'm a man who wrote his own begging letter because he was too broke and too proud to have it done proper. And this is the same. I've got no pretty words. I've only got the true ones, and they'll have to do. He looked up at her. I don't want you to stay because your name's in the book. I don't want you to stay because there's talk to settle, or because it's practical, or because two people can run a ranch better than one, though God knows all that's true. I want... His voice caught, and he pushed through it. I want you to stay through the winter and the winter after, and every winter this old place has got left in it. Not as my hired help, not even as my partner, though you're that too, and I'll write it as big as you like. I want you to stay as the woman I... He stopped. He set his jaw. He said it plain, the way he said everything that mattered. As the woman I love, Maddie. There. I said it worse than I meant to, and I don't care. I love you. I have since the ridge. Maybe since the platform, maybe since your first letter, for all I know. Stay. Marry me, or don't keep your own name, or take mine, or make me take yours. I truly don't care about the shape of it. Just stay. Be the life I get to build the rest of mine around. He ran out of words and stood there, hat mangled in his hands, having spent every one he had. Maddie looked at him a long moment, and then she looked out past him across the pasture where the creek she'd freed with her own hands ran shining in the low sun over the fat cattle and the mended fences and the ranch that everyone in the territory had already buried, and she had dug back up out of the ground. I did not come here looking to be rescued, she said quietly. I know it, Caleb said. That's half of why I love you. You came here and rescued the place. I came here, Maddie said, and her voice was steady now, steadier than it had been in 11 years. With a canvas bag half packed to run, and a letter in my sleeve, and burial money knotted in a handkerchief, because I did not believe, I could not let myself believe, that there was a single square foot of ground anywhere on this earth that would hold my weight without one day deciding I was too much for it. She turned back to him. And you built me a chair. And you noticed I don't sit. And you love me, you fool. And you said it worse than you meant to. And it's the finest thing anybody's ever said to me in my whole life. Her eyes were bright, but her voice did not break. So here is my answer. Caleb Rowan. And it's the only one I've got, and the whole town can make of it what it likes. She reached down slow, and she settled herself into the wide chair he'd built to hold her, and it took her weight without a sound. Yes, she said. I'll stay. All the winters you've got. And in the morning, first thing, I'm going to take that canvas bag out from under the bed, and I am going to unpack it down to the last thread, and I am going to burn it in the stove, and cook your breakfast over it. Because I am done keeping one foot out the door of the only place that ever built me a chair. She held out her gloved hand to him. Now sit down beside me. You've been standing this whole while, and there's room. I checked. You built it wide enough for two, and don't think I didn't notice that either. Caleb sat down beside her in the chair he'd sworn he built for one, and she'd known all along he'd made it for two, and neither of them said a word about it, because the chair had already said that too. They married in the fall in the little church at Mercy Flats, and the Reverend Ames preached the sermon he'd promised the one with nerve in it, and the pews were full, because a town will always turn out for a wedding it once tried to ruin, and Maddie let them come, because she'd stopped needing their approval so long ago that their presence couldn't touch her either way. Mrs. Cobb stood up with her. Jonah gave her away in his best shirt, with his arm long since mended, and when the Reverend asked who presented this woman, the old man said loud enough for the back row, "The whole outfit does, and we'd fight any man who says different," which was not the correct response and brought the house down, and was everyone agreed after the best part of the whole affair. Tom cried. Friel cried harder, and pretended it was dust. Even Pryor came and sold nobody anything, and looked at the window not once. Del Harmon did not come, but word had it he'd left the county by winter gone to try his luck somewhere. He hadn't stood in a crowd, and watched a fat woman he'd mocked turn out to be the strongest soul any of them had ever met. And Maddie found she could wish him well in a distant way, and mean it, which she counted as the last of the healing. And the ranch grew. That was the part that would have sounded like a tall tale if the whole territory hadn't watched it happen. The water that had been choked 50 years ran free, and free water in dry country is the closest thing to a printing press for money that God ever made. The herd doubled and doubled again. They bought back the old Selby place when it came up at a fair price, and gave the Vances a share to work their own land instead of losing it, and hired half the men who'd once been too proud or too scared to hire onto a dying outfit. The porch got mended, and then the whole house, and then a bigger house, though Maddie kept the old chair and would let no one so much as sand it. She planted her herbs by the kitchen window, the yarrow and the sage, the same that had saved a calf a lifetime ago, and they spread until the whole south side of the house was a physic garden that half the county came to for their fevers, and she never once turned a soul away nor charged a body who couldn't pay. And within 5 years, by every honest reckoning and every man's count who kept the tallies, the Rowan Ranch, the dying outfit, the sold grave, the place Elias Crowder had ridden out in the dark to bury, was the largest cattle ranch in the whole territory. The largest. Built out of a choked spring and a stubborn woman and an old man's gloves and a chair made wide enough for two. There came an evening years on when the two of them sat out on that porch as the light went long and gold across a pasture so green and so wide a body couldn't see the far end of it. Cattle scattered fat to the horizon, the creek that bore her name in her own private reckoning. For she'd never told a soul she thought of Cold Betty as half hers running silver down off the ridge she'd once crawled up on her hands and knees while men laughed. Jonah dozed in his own chair nearby, older, now gentler, the meanness all gone out of him. Somewhere out in the yard, Tom, a foreman now, was teaching one of the Cobb boys to throw a rope, and Maddie Whitaker. Rowan sat in the chair her husband had built to her measure, that had held her every evening of her married life without a single word of complaint, and she was not perched on a step, and she was not standing at the edge, and she was not doing the arithmetic before she trusted her weight to the world. She was just sitting, in her own chair, on her own porch, on land that bore her name in a book in ink that had never once faded. "You know what I was thinking," Caleb said beside her. "You were thinking, you're a lucky man, and you're right, and I'll thank you not to say it out loud again this week. You've said it enough." But she was smiling. "I was thinking about the platform," Caleb said. "First day, those men laughing, and you stood there with your bag at your feet and your chin up and wouldn't let one of them see you flinch." He reached over and took her hand, the one still faintly scarred across the palm, and held it. They thought they were watching a woman get off a train who couldn't climb into a wagon. And they were really watching the biggest ranch in the territory arrive on the noon car with a canvas bag and a sewing basket. Maddie laughed low and warm. "They laughed at the obese woman he hired," she said, "and they were laughing at the woman who was going to save all their springs and outlive all their cruelty and be buried someday, a long time from now, in the greenest ground in the county, Right up on that ridge next to the water, she dug out with her own 2 hands. She squeezed his hand. Let them laugh. A person's worth was never once measured by the space they take up, nor by a pretty face, nor by what a town expects, nor by the meanness of the men who never bothered to look past the size of her. Worth is courage. Worth is patience. Worth is knowing a thing and being willing